All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Wednesday, January 21st. It is 9 a.m., and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm being joined this morning by Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Nicole Morgan. We're also joined this morning by our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer, our two Chief Deputies, Karen Mogus and Eric Ekdahl, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer. Our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her this morning is Margie Ardrell and Elizabeth Carrillo. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and web components. If you're joining us virtually, you should be viewing us through the traditional webcast, either on the CaliPA website or the YouTube Live website. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There is a link at the top of our agenda with instructions on how to get onto the platform. But if you're having any challenges getting onto that platform, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov. and she can help get you onto the platform. Once you are there, your camera will be off. You will be on mute until it's your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone in the room, good morning. Good to see you all. We're here in Sacramento this morning in the California Environmental Protection Agency building. A few quick announcements for us as well. Please observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further direction. Also, if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to sign up, and there is a QR code on the side of the room. There's also a laptop in order to sign up. Once you are at the podium, please introduce yourself, any affiliation you have, and then lastly, please just silence your phone so we have an uninterrupted meeting today. We don't actually have any public forum commenters this morning, so we will move right into board business. Our first item of board business is consideration of the board meeting minutes from the January 6th board meeting. And look to fellow board colleagues if they have any adjustments to the meeting minutes or otherwise a motion.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you both. And Ms. Tyler, can you please call the roll call vote?
Board Member Morgan.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The first item is adopted. That brings us to our uncontested item. And I'm not seeing any additional commenters. I don't believe we'll remove it, but I just do want to acknowledge and thank all the work that has gone into it from the Division of Financial Assistance and from advocates in the water reuse community. This is an item to just be able to adopt emergency regulations to administer dollars that we received here for water recycling from Prop 4 and funding. But without any further discussion, if there's any reason to pull it off by board members or otherwise, I'd accept a motion.
I'll move adoption of item 2.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call roll call vote?
Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
Board Member Morgan.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The item is unanimously adopted, and thank you again for everyone's great work on it. Next, we will move on to informational items, which we have a couple of informational items from our Delta Water Master usual update, and we also have the Delta Stewardship Council's lead scientist update thereafter. Good to see you this morning on our first update of the year. Good to see you.
Yes, I think still appropriate to say Happy New Year. So
Yeah, the whole month, I feel generally.
all right. Mr. Chair, board members, it's a pleasure to be with you today to give you an update on the Office of the Delta Water Master activities in the last quarter, and appreciate the opportunity to share out with you a little bit here. Next slide, please. We're going to focus a bit on how we are working in close coordination with the Division of Water Rights toward implementation and effective reporting in the new Cal Waters data system. And I'm pleased to actually share out today that we just reached this morning our 1,000 filer metric. So we've got about a third of Delta filers in. And so feeling like we're bringing folks along into the new system. And so trying to kind of have a high touch approach and migrating people from the Delta ACP platform into Cal Waters. And it's definitely, Will is going to touch on that in some depth today to give you a sense of our work. Additionally, this is consistent with the board's update of the SB 88 regulations. We're going to touch on that in some of the work that we're doing with respect to thinking through the large diverter requirements. In tying all this together is the continued work that Michael George began in the Delta Measurement Experimental Consortium, which we're actively continuing today, and bringing the greater water community institutionally and individually along in better understanding these issues. And finally, just kind of an update in our continued interaction with multiple parties and understanding where we are in Delta science and monitoring in the Delta. Next slide, please. So I touched on this earlier. We're really making it a priority of our team, given the investment in the last couple of years, really co-investment with the Delta water agencies in developing the Delta ACP reporting platform, which you're aware utilizes OpenET data to really drive an understanding of actual consumptive use in the Delta. And as we have noted previously, the success of that platform is really demonstrated in getting to 99% reporting levels. And so really having kind of a very integrated relationship with all reporters and constructive relationships with the Delta water agencies to really help drive those activities. And so, Will, why don't I turn it over to you here to kind of jump in and touch on filing activities.
Good morning. Will Anderson, Senior Engineer in the Office of the Delta Water Master. And as Jay was saying, we have really a high-touch approach with our contacts, our agent network in the legal Delta, including Central Delta Water Agency, South Delta Water Agency, major users, and folks who report for a number of different users. And so in addition to the outreach that the database team has done, we've kind of reinforced that with the additional paper letters, and we have a real, good email database from the Delta ACP program. And we're also taking advantage of the excellent help desk queue that is in the new system, which really helps connect the wires and put together the user accounts and their rights. And this figure on the right is a past year's reporting data, but it really shows the 2/3 of the Delta that's covered by the Delta ACP and the knowledge of the place of use, and able to display it that way. Next slide, please. So this is the first fun pie chart of the day. Our status of reporting is out of date, actually, since this presentation was generated 1 week ago. At that time, we had about 2/3 of the users active in the system, so there's kind of a two-step process. The main big hurdle here is getting all the users to log in, activate their account, and familiarize themselves with the brand new system. And I'm pleased to report an update today that 90% of the Delta users are active in the system. And so even though it's crunch time right now, reports are due at the end of the month, that we've got 90% of users that are in there, they're getting the hang of it. And once they're in, they're finding that it's fairly straightforward and streamlined to get the reports in. So I think we're starting to see that as a win. Just a little bit further characterization of the Delta water rights. When we move from a right-by-right approach to an actual account where the user account is tied to a number of rights, it really clarifies the relatively few number of agents, which could be water rights attorneys, engineers, ag management companies, or even neighbors helping their neighbors out with the reporting system. So there's only 20 accounts for half of all the rights, but the rest of the Delta is about 700 users that are tied to these rights. Part of the work here has been connecting those wires between the agents and their rights. We get some phone calls saying, hey, I can't see this one. We hook them up, and we've been able to move through it that way. So next slide, please. So, key lessons that I'd just like to illuminate is that it takes a lot of hands-on work with the users. We get to know them a little better. And so to actually do the technical aspects, the CalWaters team has been supporting us very actively to solve any issues that we have with connecting the users to their rights and just what's going on there. There are a lot of duplicate accounts. Say in the old system, someone might have their names, with a little different punctuation or something, and we just have to connect those up. The really positive aspect of this intensive work is that we get to update our data by touching every record, talking with almost every user. We get to really make sure that their beneficial uses are correct and so on. And I mentioned before the robust case tracking system that we can really keep a record of that and pass that on between staff. One aspect of the more modern system is the incorporating geospatial relationships for the places of use. As seen in the example in this picture of the delineated place of use from the Delta Alternative Compliance Program, this does add some complexity, and so there's still a few little wrinkles to iron out with the flow of how we incorporate a new place of use and how those all get connected, because we've got it's kind of a system integration exercise between the existing State Water Board GIS database, which uses ESRI system, and so the CalWaters talks to it and passes information back and forth. So there's been a ton of work in integrating the Delta ACP into CalWaters, which, as we mentioned before, gets to use the OpenET as a proxy for consumptive use. Next slide, please.
So building upon the SB 88 regulations, which the board adopted last year, I think, as Will noted, that one of the real advantages of being able to build out this architecture from DACP is having clear delineation of points of diversion and places of use throughout the Delta. That effectively is a 3,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and in a few years, CalWaters will produce that on a statewide basis. So we can query the data and look for agreement and disagreement and numbers that look right and don't look right, and understand, in the case of a program like the following incentive-based efforts to conserve water, where those impacts are effective, and being able to actually measure those outcomes. And where this becomes particularly important is thinking about the large diverters in the legal delta, and those number in the range of about 35 diverters that are effectively diverting more than a third that encompass more than a third of delta diverted water. And so that class of diverters are those diverting at rates of 30 CFS, or roughly computationally 10,000 acre-feet a year. And those diverters, pursuant to the regs adopted by the board, have to have some kind of measuring device. And what we have found in meeting with large diverters around the Delta is these systems are going to look different depending upon the characteristics of their design and distribution of water throughout their service areas, in the case of both reclamation district and irrigation district. So what Pescadero ends up doing to comply will look significantly different than Contra Costa Water District, and different than what RD 2068 does in the Cache Slough complex. And so we're kind of trying to, these regulations really take hold in water year 27. So we're trying to be very deliberative in meeting diverters and thinking about different methodologies for compliance with that. And to that end, the Delta Measurement Experimental Consortium is really kind of focusing in this body of work and looking at different models. Next slide, please. In thinking about what kinds of measurement instruments help us get the highest level of data confidence in what the outcomes are showing, how that data compares with OpenET data, and really help us kind of understand in a closer to real-time fashion, because these large diverters will be reporting on weekly and even more aggressive time steps at higher levels of diversion. So we're trying to be methodical and secure buy-in of diverters to really understand the data and have an open dialogue about what data is most useful to them and what data is compliant with the regulations. Well,
As Jay mentioned at the top, the previous water master, Michael George, had initiated this Delta Measurement Experimental Consortium to meet with local water users and consultants and engineers to evaluate the best, most cost feasible, most technically feasible ways to measure the very many siphons and other irrigation practices, diversion practices in the Delta that are really challenging for folks. And so this is approximately a quarterly meeting that we have, and we bring in various folks who are involved with research projects, both owner stakeholders and other academic researchers. We see the instrumentation in the photo is called an eddy covariance measurement site. Basically measures the atmospheric turbulence, which influences how much water is evaporating from the farm field. Various studies have compared the sites, including work funded by DWR and the Delta Conservancy. And we're regularly meeting with these researchers to assess, what are the on-the-ground measurements telling us, and how that compares to the satellite remote sensing information. And also, where are the data gaps where we might consider future investments in research, and what are the questions we need to ask there. Next slide, please. So one very intensive study has been undertaken by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and they own 4 of the major islands, including Bolden Island here is the site of a very intensive water balance study. And this, they've got measurement flow meters at over 30 of the siphons that provide water, and they're siphons because it's well below sea level. In addition, they're measuring their drainage flows to keep the island from flooding. In addition, soil moisture sensors, which should provide insight into how the water is moving in the soil from the channels, under the levees, and what's the contribution. There's a preliminary estimate that about 30% of the water that actually gets used in the crops on this island is from seepage, from just the groundwater. And so all of this data gathering is intended to provide a detailed picture that can be further studied with a groundwater model, and they have a consultant contract for that. So we're very excited about this particular one. We were able to visit this site in September and take a tour and really get a detailed overview of what's going on there. And so that should be very informative in comparing the any flow meter data with the satellite data that we have. And so trying to wrap all that up with multiple lines of evidence. Next slide, please. An additional stakeholder doing local work here is the Nature Conservancy, and they manage lands on Staten Island, which also has a lot of siphons. They're not able to measure all of the siphons from a technical and cost standpoint, but they are actively installing gauges on their drainage pumps. And so we're trying to assess to what extent this part of the water balance is important. What's the portion and proportion of how much water is, having to be removed from the island, being another a well-subsided island. And so, again, how that compares to the satellite data. Furthermore, it's very interesting to see the challenges with the various data that can be collected, such as different meters may foul based on the dirty water that they're pumping off, and different costs on those meters, and different reliability. It's very key to have pump tests to evaluate, when you turn on the pump, how much is it putting out, and to do further measurements and have an engineer validate that and sign off on that. That's really key for us to have in a lot of places and for a lot of pumps. They're also evaluating the extent to which power meter records can, when the pump is on, tracking the power that it uses, and this would be correlated to the pump test of how much power, how many horsepower, how many kilowatt hours it takes to run a pump, and how that correlates to the cubic feet per second that's coming off the pump. So pretty much everybody's got a power meter on their pump, so the extent to which that helps provide data may be cost effective. So this particular user has been very forthcoming with that information, and so I find that really helpful. Next slide, please. So when we roll it all up and look at water use across the Delta, this is a picture that we hadn't shown before. And this is using the OpenET remote sensing collection of satellite data integrated with ground weather stations, et cetera. And the question is, well, what's the total water use? What's the total consumptive use in the Delta? And this is one way to look at a holistic picture of the total water use, and we see, basically 2/3 of the water is ag water use. We've also got other components of that picture, which is how much evaporates from the water surface, how much, is being transpired from urban areas. Riparian vegetation, for example, which would account for wetland restoration and tens of thousands of acres that are kind of being converted from ag to restoration. So this is not an exact picture. The reason I'm showing it is not so that we can look at the exact number, but the view of the categories that we can refine our uncertainty, reduce our uncertainty, and get a clearer, more resolved picture of everything. And this is kind of a game changer to look at it this way. And so the future holds a great promise in kind of demystifying the black box of the Delta and showing, here are the components, because, a key factor is, what's the in-Delta use? It's been a long-standing question, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and what is that in a drought? Where does it go? So this is just a frame for potential further investigations and research to kind of look at these various categories and evaluate kind of where it goes, and not just the measurements on the pumps. So it's more a holistic picture. And that concludes my part of the talk.
Next slide, please. So we've talked a bit, and I think Will gave a really important overview of our efforts in Delta water accounting, getting better real-time information about timing aligned with water rights and conversion of those rights from agriculture to habitat uses. And we've begun to have some conversations with Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and DWR in reporting and modernizing their data approaches too, as major water users in the Delta. And I think also it's, as we've discussed previously, it's very important to think about the values that we're managing toward in different areas of the Delta, and how did the problem solution framework help us actually align with broader board objectives in the update of the Water Quality Control Plan and other permitting actions before the board later in the year. And in particular, in kind of pulling this out holistically, we're thinking giving a lot of attention to the diverters and the cache slough complex, and have begun discussions about in lower water years, do we need to have diversion schedules to better understand water quality dynamics and diversions and how they're working together to protect ecological flow objectives and that the board is seeking to achieve in measures such as the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program. So it's really important that we have integrated data-driven approaches here and thinking about the habitat values that we're seeking to manage to. There are some really interesting experiments and landowner discussions happening in the Suisun complex, also looking at fairly significant scale flood up for tidal wetland habitat outside the duck season. And so working with landowners, say, hey, your primary objective may be the duck club hunting endeavors that you're sponsoring here. But in the rest of the year, what can we do together to produce phytoplankton and zooplankton and flush the plankton into Suisun Marsh? And so there's some really interesting pilot projects underway that are not formally a part of the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program, but that would nest nicely in that over the next 8 years. And so again, I think the critical point is to make sure that we're getting the right data from these places. They're similarly, Lower McCallamy and Casumnes, we haven't had a whole lot of rain, but we got a nice compressed period of rain and saw a lot of floodplain flood up in the Casumnes Basin, and needing to understand, how are those functioning in the context of salmonid habitat objectives? How are the mitigation banks functioning alongside other large-scale restoration that DWR has undertaken at McCormick-Williamson Tract, for example? So trying to get a better integrated assessment of multiple values that we're managing toward. And then additionally, I'm going to touch a bit on some encouraging developments in the South Delta. So next slide, please. So just yesterday, the Department of Water Resources has signed off on a multipurpose dredging memorandum of understanding across state, federal, and local agencies. We have been working closely with the department, for the past year in really advancing this effort, better understanding what kinds of strategies need to be integrated. Obviously, there are policy elements of this, and then there's a local, federal, and state match formula that we have to kind of put our heads together on, and how do we actually provide funding to do dredging projects. But I think that we're making progress. And so we're also seeing a concerted effort among all parties to develop legislative ideas to incorporate into the Water Resources Development Act, often referred to as the WRDA at the federal level, to really broaden the Corps' role in the Delta beyond the deep water ship channels, but to also engage more actively in routine maintenance of critical freshwater connectivity pathways like Middle River. And some work was done by the consulting firm Anchor QEA that we plan to tier off of to look at a portfolio of potential pilot projects where we could begin some in-water work, and have been actively talking with staff at Region 5 and thinking about how we expedite permitting. If all the stars align, could we seek an emergency action, which would be a local designation, but that would then afford permitting to do some in-water channel work ahead of the next diversion season. And don't know if that's going to be possible. We have multiple parties working toward that end, but it would be a great experiment, as the board's well aware. As we see the pumps ramping up operations in mid-July and August, it's been fairly predictable that we've had some local stresses in the Delta about in water level response and the ability to meet the needs of local diverters there. So we're trying to kind of align a multifaceted action plan, if you will, and working closely in this process with Central Valley growers as well. And so the Great Valley Farm Water Partnership, which has incorporated a number of growers in the Delta as well as the Central Valley to find areas where there's common cause and where we can work together in both policy and funding actions to really actively address the need for a channel maintenance program in the South Delta. So pleased to report that we have some tangible progress here now and really getting a level of focused attention from local, state, and federal entities, as well as the contractors south of the Delta. Next slide, please. As part of this scope, also, Metropolitan Water District has been doing some work in looking at comprehensive actions in thinking about a freshwater pathway in the Eastern Delta that could better address long-term water reliability needs for both the state and federal projects. In thinking toward a reality that even if the Delta Conveyance Project were approved today, Metropolitan retains 85% reliability on through water Delta delivery. So it's, the projects, if we even leap forward 30 years and there were a conveyance project in the Delta, there's still no substitute for the need to actually actively maintain channels, levees in the South Delta. And they have done some work looking at the elements of investment in levees, being about a $700 million proposition in the Southern Delta, and Delta-wide, roughly $3 billion would provide a level of security and better reliability for a functional freshwater pathway, as well as meeting other ecological and flow objectives in the Delta. Next slide, please. So underneath all of this remains an ongoing concern. We've begun a series of meetings involving key division staff and our office in looking at how are we performing and looking at the monitoring stations throughout the Delta. And as we've shared with you previously, as the board has noted, the Bureau of Reclamation elected to contract out its longstanding monitoring relationship with USGS last summer. And in the graph you see on the right, the challenge that we're confronting is the Bureau's network of gauging and monitoring stations remains offline as we sit here today. So we're now 3 months down the road. We can understand that there's always a challenge in transitioning a contract of this scale and magnitude. But I think it is unsettling, at least, in thinking about the data gaps that emerge. And in the visualization on the left, you see the Delta in healthy condition. So I think everybody is happy there. The red indices are high levels of salinity. As long as we're keeping salinity at that in the Western Delta, all water users are generally happy. There was a period in September when the red zone actually encroached all the way into Frank's Tract at the center of the map there. And that's when we all start to begin to pause and say, wait. We got to manage this better to meet all beneficial uses of water in the Delta. And in particular, if we're going to start to think about the values as you look at the gauges that are offline in the Sassoon complex, in the lower McCollum and the lower San Joaquin, you start to scratch your head and say, well, as we begin the modernization or next steps toward a water quality control plan update, are we getting the data that we need to ensure that we're actually achieving the objectives, even of D1641, let alone the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Program, or a regulated flow approach? So I think it's really important that the board remains engaged in looking at where we are with the Bureau and where we are in a QA/QC of the data to ensure that we're getting data to uniform data standards that the USGS had been really charged with truing up. So it's, so it's important to note how we're doing there. So it's, let me, next slide, please. So I think just touching on some of this, we're kind of covering a dashboard of questions that I think are important for the board to raise in the context of other issues, and how we're looking at integration of different objectives throughout the Delta to restore habitat, and how we actually effectively engage the Bureau as a genuine partner in science and data sharing. And I should note that as we're seeing the data measured in the system, and we've got a process now underway, again, with division working with DWR to raise these questions on a monthly basis to really kind of do a cross-check of are we all working together here to achieve the same outcomes? Do we have a data confidence level in the data that we're seeing, that we're all really focused on this together. And we are understanding from the Bureau that they are collecting the data at the monitoring stations, but that is not, the transmission of the data is not yet available at most of these stations. So we think we're on the right track, and I think we are certainly from our office as well as division intent on continuing to, I think we've kind of provided a pretty reasonable transition window to the new contractor team, and now is the moment to up our level of communication with all parties to make sure that we're managing data in a way that we're openly sharing not just the data, but the QA/QC methodologies to understand that we're seeing the same values in the data. So, next slide, please. And I think all of this tears off the National Academy of Sciences report that was released last November, and thinking about that report really focused on key elements of the cold water pool management, some attention to the development of upstream refugia above Shasta Dam and conditions in the tributaries above the dam. We're also looking in the effectiveness of fall run management actions below the dam, how we can better protect temperature conditions, and smelt habitat conditions in the Delta. But I think in particular, the report addressed important attention to the need for an integrated federal state science hub. I think all parties would be unilaterally aligned in saying we've lost some functionality in the interagency ecological program. And how do we replace that? How do we bring it back? I think that's the principal question that the NAS report brings us back to. And I think one of the issues of consideration for the board is, in thinking about a science hub, in thinking about the water quality control plan update, can the board actually lean forward into a data standards approach that would help discipline federal and state data sharing, data collection methodologies, data analysis together, in really reintegrating a level of accessibility and transparency to that data, so that we are again aligned in understanding the values that we're managing to in the Delta. And so I think that's something that I would put forward for the board's consideration, especially in this period of continued uncertainty about the level of quality of the data. And we've also learned that as effective December 31, the Bureau has moved to also outsource its ecological monitoring programs, which had conventionally been done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we're very much going in two different tracks here as we think about data, and that's a worrisome place to be unless there is a high level of confidence in the integration of those data sets. Next slide, please. So I think that's what we have for you today. Thank you, and happy to take any questions that you may have.
That was all fantastic. And really appreciate it, Mr. Ziegler, Mr. Anderson, for the continued work with Delta Water users here. As your presentation was heavily about data, I really appreciate it because we are in a moment where we're needing to really refocus on the system that we have and ensuring that it's going to meet the needs for us into the decades ahead. And there is a lot of change, obviously at the federal level, but even here amongst us as state agencies. So I think your call for us to be a bit more integrated is welcomed. I think it's certainly been a focus of myself here at the board on our data, the transparency of that data, the usability of it, and importantly, the foundation that it rests as for us all collectively as decision makers, because it's not just the decisions this board is making, is all the disparate decisions that whether water users or other agencies are making, and we need to have a more integrated approach. And so just thank you. I appreciate all those points. And I want to give a shout out to Delta Water users. I know a lot of effort went into the alternative compliance plan, went into the platform that was created, and trying to better create a tool for themselves collectively to be able to manage water. And I know as we've now come in with Cal Waters and our updated system, it can feel to them, is this a sunk cost? Did we do all this work for nothing? And it's not. It had actually been very critical to actually informing our update of our system. And so to hear the compliance, at least getting folks into the system is really, I appreciate that. It's good to hear. And that folks are finding it to be a simple process as well is beneficial to hear. As we said when we kind of highlighted the release this last fall of Cal Waters, it's the system unto itself doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
It's really about the interaction from water users, about all of us collectively making the best use of that system and the culture change that comes with that. And so just thank you for all that personal time and touch. I know it's taken to help bring folks along to allay fears, to get folks oriented and seeing this as the positive change that it is. And so really glad to hear the folks signing on, at least into the platform, has increased. And again, just want to give a shout out to the Delta Water users for all the work that they did do in embracing ET and helping us to better manage what is a very complex system we well know, especially in the legal delta. And I think that the data streams that we're having coming in is helping us better understand that holistic picture, that more integrated approach when it comes to management in the delta. When it comes to I'll just say, concerns around reclamation and their contract, something that I'd like to make sure, I know that we certainly didn't welcome the news of pivoting away from USGS. I think we had concerns. To your point, it's been about 3 months, and I think it's now time to really bring folks together, Reclamation, DWR, ourselves, Fish and Wildlife, to make sure that we are continuing to make sure we are aligned in this vision of a more data-rich, transparent, and interoperable system here between water rights and water managers across the system. And it's going to require us to not go backwards on our data, whether it's stream gauges or water quality. And so I think it's now is a really important time to ensure that we don't let this divergence happen just before us, but we really do take an opportunity to wrap our arms around it. To your point with the Bay Delta Plan update here coming before the board, and really turning the page, if you will, into this new chapter of how we will collectively be looking to manage both the Delta, but the legal Delta, but the Delta watershed writ large. And I think it's just really important we give ourselves the best benefit of this moment where the CalFed days are gone. We've kind of been in this languishing space this last decade or so, where we're looking to update the Bay Delta Plan. And I think now is the time to embrace what is the full promise, I think, of turning the page and really getting into a more modern approach of both water rights administration, but also technical understanding of this complex watershed. Stop there. That was a lot. But it was because you had so many great points here within the work of the Delta Water Master, and just really appreciate the continued leadership. Looking to fellow board colleagues for comment or question. Vice Chair.
Well, thank you. And I too just want to really thank you for the good launch of the Cal Waters program and working with the Delta Water users. And so you deserve congratulations. And as the chair said, so do they, really working together. I just like to hear a little bit more about, let's just call it vision on the more targeted collection of information on the TNC project and on the Metropolitan. The the integrated approach of collecting all these different data points, keeping in mind, though, that it's so site-specific in the Delta. It's the seepage issue, for example, on the Met project, 30% seepage. That's interesting. But can we extrapolate? And I think it's probably too early to tell, but what would be your vision based on what you see so far on those two projects as far as time frame that you would need to collect the information and then maybe make recommendations on whether or not it'd be valuable to have additional sites and the time frame that you would need in order to get this to the next level of information that we need looking at the Delta more holistically?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, in essence, what we're really trying to do at both the Nature Conservancy Island at Staten Island and Bolden Island immediately south of Staten Island is to true up the actual water budget for each of those islands with their unique elevation characteristics. And so I think we had previously reported on the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program, looking at various measures for the effectiveness of conservation programs around the Delta. And I think what we're really trying to do, and Will's comprehensive slide of looking at the roll-up of consumptive use in the Delta, is to really improve data confidence. And to that end, at Bolden, for example, there are eddy covariance stations. There are soil water depth meters. There are and then the OpenET metrics, as well as measuring the diversion meters. And so we're really kind of trying to take every angle there to be as precise as possible in an understanding of what the consumptive use is at Bolden, and then to really then begin to compare that to islands at similar elevation in the Central Delta, and again, just really refine our understanding of actual consumptive use on those islands. There's been a lot of talk and I think hope that power records may be a very helpful surrogate for more accurate reporting on the level of pumping from individual siphon pumps in the Delta. And so one of the things that Met had shared previously with us is that the individual the cost of effectively gauging those siphon pumps would roughly in the range of $30,000 to $60,000 a year for an individual pump. If you think about 3,000 points of diversion across the Delta, a number of those points not actually connected to electrical power. And then the data irregularities that we were seeing off of those pumps were just giving us highly impeachable data on what the pumps were. But I think our vision is really to roll up these different methodologies for measuring water diversion and consumptive use as precise as we can throughout the Delta. Again, looking at different technologies, pump efficiency analytics in some places. How's that align with the power records? That's really a big part of the work that TNC is doing on these tailwater pumps. And so as they kind of look at a comprehensive budget, Met's sort of looking at it affirmatively by looking at pump meters on each of their diversion pumps, but other farmers don't have the resources to put a $30,000 to $60,000 per pump gauging device on their diversion pipe. So we're really trying to, I think, holistically try to improve the data set while we work individually with different diverters and applying different methodologies to get as precise as we can and to look at different metrics, whether it's eddy covariant data, whether it's diversion pump data, whether it's OpenET data, and looking for that alignment and really, again, trying to reach the highest level of data confidence in how much water is being consumed at each diversion from each, especially toward the major diverters in the delta as we think about this. Yeah, please.
If I may just add a slightly different angle in terms of answering the question about the time context. So water balance studies in the Delta have been ongoing for over 70 years and initiated by the Department of Water Resources in the creation and use of the models that they have for maybe 3 or 4 decades in terms of Delta simulation and the new technologies there. So it's kind of a long-term study context. These have been some very hard estimates to find. I mean, the seepage underground is a very difficult thing to measure, and it is unique, absolutely reflecting the unique hydrologic characteristics of all the different areas of the delta and their soils and their different levee heights and degree of subsidence. So since all this, the conclusions of the existing paradigm of water balance are fed into operations models and planning models, are fed into DSM, and are used by the operations agencies to understand what's going on. And the question in terms of some of the other aspects of the science hub is the potential for us to further collaborate using the new tools and the new data. How would that feed into the models and how they work? So it's a long-term time frame, and the better we can get an integrated picture here in-house, and then the better we can communicate and talk with other scientists and engineers and operators at places like QEMF, the California Water Engineering and Modeling Forum, and potentially other academic research can help understand what's the wetland water use, how accurate is OpenET, and what are the strengths and opportunities there. So that's just some additional insight.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think for me, just being like all of us, anxious about moving forward on this topic, and I do see at this stage that there is, this concerted effort to collect more information, be more objective about it, but then, working with sister agencies and all agencies, to kind of get to an agreement about what that information means. And so just as you continue to provide reports on it, I think the timelines would be helpful, because I do sense forward movement, but then making it, maybe a little more real. Like in particular on the 2 projects, Bolden Island and Staten, do they have reports that are part of the project, reports due out at a certain time frame?
Yeah, I think we're going to learn quite a bit in the next irrigation season on both of those. They're really still in project design. Met had hoped to have the Bolden more fully metered last year. Similarly, TNC was held up a bit on meter reliability on the tailwater project. They did have some data for September, which was pretty interesting and getting closer to alignment or at least the ability to develop an algorithm for better aligning the pumping power needed with actual water going through the pipe. And so I think we're, again, I think all of these things candidly are moving a little slower, and we just had a number of challenges in really bringing the system online. But I am optimistic that I think we'll have full irrigation season data from both Bolden and Staten this year. So that's going to be great to be able to work with them and pull that together.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really important time to try to pull those threads together for sure. I know this has been, state water project contractors and others, a longstanding concern of what's happening within the Delta, and hopefully there's just trust as we go through this process and unpack what we're seeing and bringing folks along, because I think
I
that's a big
should
part of
note
it.
also that Public Policy Institute of California has started a water accounting project designed to really bring the all watershed interests together and thinking about the upper watershed, the delta, and pump operations. And so our office and Division of Water Rights are both actively participating in that project. And so I think that's, again, I think candidly, the way we're operating is to try to be as open source as we can in all of the data and sharing out as much as we can to bring everybody together to ask questions early in the process and thinking about different methodologies and how they interact together.
Definitely, really appreciate that approach and do appreciate the work the PPIC is doing around the accounting. Fellow colleagues, anything further at this moment? All right, hearing none. Appreciate it. Thank you
Great.
both. Much appreciation. And now we'll move on to item number 4, which is a follow-on from our lead scientist, lead Delta scientist here. Good to see you,
I'm sorry, didn't.
Dr. Wyndham Myers. Good to see you.
Sorry about that. Let's see.
Keep those up.
Yes.
Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you for starting right on time. I sat in the audience and really enjoyed that last presentation. I really enjoyed the last presentation. You should know that my background is in eddy covariance and open ET, so I love seeing it being used in a policy setting. It's great. So yeah, let me begin. Thanks for having me again. Happy New Year. It's been a long time since I've given a lead scientist report. The last one was last July, and then we had the federal government shutdown, and here we are, 2026. I want to first congratulate you on where you guys are in the update of the Bay Delta Plan. I know that there's a letter coming soon from the Delta Stewardship Council in support and with feedback. And then I know also that Cal Waters has had a wonderful reception. I think the transparency and the accessibility is well recognized. And so those are progresses that I want to highlight that I thought that were great, in addition to the progress that I just saw in this presentation from both Will and Jay. I also want to call out 2026 in particular as a year of intentional connections and not taking science and scientists for granted. I think that science is the single best tool that humans have developed to peer into the future, and it's a gift that we all share and but we all participate in. And so I think part of the issue is just valuing what we've got, and then keeping an eye on that community. So before moving forward, next slide, please. I will talk about things that we're currently active in right now in the council, but I want to just also reflect on the past. So I'm not going to talk a lot about what happened last year, all of our achievements, but there's a fabulous, beautiful online annual report in a story map format that you could go in and look at presentations and products and a narrative of what was achieved, again, towards all of the co-equal goals that we focus on, enhancing water supply reliability, ecosystem resilience, and all while recognizing the culture of the Delta as place. The other thing I want to highlight is that monthly we have wonderful science presentations in council. Tomorrow's this month's council meeting. And I'm highlighting here on the right one that we just heard, we call it Operation Baseline. It was work done by the USGS to track before and after measurements of water quality in the Delta that were expected to be affected by the big Sac Sewer wastewater treatment plant upgrade. It was almost $2 billion. And the data is very powerful. A report just came out and we heard from them not only on that project, but how they revolutionized the way water quality is monitored in the Delta. And so there's an opportunity there to keep that moving forward. I just want to also highlight that we work strongly with agencies, tribes, communities to adapt to change, always with the best possible science. Our 2025 projects are ongoing now. That includes the research awards, everything from agriculture to sturgeon flow relationships, to the Delta Research Fellows, which have also, the Science Fellows have begun their projects. There's blogs and other products that you can link to in this annual report. I also want to highlight that we were part of the CNRA's Secretary Speaker Series on climate extremes and their impacts. And then there's many public events that are highlighted here too on adaptive management and shared access to science. And I can speak more to that, but if we go to the next slide. Thank you. I'm just going to highlight one that we just had, which was the Delta Invasive Species Symposium on the right-hand side here. This is a recording that's now online. It was a full house, and it was covering all kinds of topics that might be of interest to you, including frameworks for responding to the presence of invasive species, like aquatic weeds, like nutria. And also the current status and updates on spread and control of golden mussel. So that there was a lot of effort put into that in this particular meeting. What I'm going to highlight here on the left, as you can see in the next 10 minutes for today, is progress that we're making right now on 2 independent scientific peer reviews, the status of the 2026 Delta Science Plan, the upcoming Bay Delta Science Conference, our synthesis working groups that are kicking off in a month or 2, the Delta Modeling Collaboratory, progress we've made, and then also the status of reviews that are going to be coming out from the Independent Science Board shortly. So next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so for independent peer review, they are deep in the middle of 2 current peer reviews that both have to do with Chinook salmon. In particular, the annual loss experienced in early 2024 and early 2025 for winter run Chinook. Winter run Chinook is an endangered species. The review was called for by the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources, and it was scoped last summer and fall by an interagency planning team that included NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Department of Fish and Game. I'm sorry, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the panel kicked off in November. They've been asked to do a deep dive into understanding how actions and decisions contributed to the exceedance of annual loss thresholds in both 2024 and 2025, and whether any monitoring or modeling approaches could have altered that outcome. There's 3 reviewers, and then there's a single panel report coming out in February that is meant to provide insight on potential ways forward in future years. The second review that I'm highlighting here is one that we just started literally the first week of January, and it's on spring run Chinook salmon. And in particular, the panel is charged with reviewing the approach to how the annual spring run juvenile production estimate is arrived at. So for clarity, this is what's needed for a life cycle modeling approach. And the JPE, as it's called, is how we assess how many young of the year fish are produced in a given year, and that gives us a sense of the annual fraction of survival, salvage, things like that. So the review will have a public in-person input component that will be in Sacramento on February 24th. And at that point, the 5-member panel will share where they are in their assessment and be open to comments from the public on additional contributions to consider in the final panel report, which we expect to release in April. And there's many other reviews coming up, but they're all in the scoping phase right now, so I just hope to highlight those in future quarterly reports. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, the Delta Science Plan 2026 update has been drafted. It's been out in review since November. And this again is our community-derived roadmap of how we do science in the Delta, our guiding principles for the whole Delta science community. And we seek to update it every 5 years. So the 2019 science plan has had a lot of good traction, and we're hoping that this 2026 version carries some of that momentum even further. These are all things you may have remembered from previous lead scientist reports I've given you, but we went bold this time. We have the entire structure is based on 4 grand challenges that we intend to use to unite us towards a common vision of how we can improve science for decision-making in these very challenging times. We're still taking public comments, as you can see, for another 9 days. We extended the deadline. So if you still have perspectives to share, we really do want the whole community to contribute. We've even made this simple survey. There's a link here that you can go to for the online survey, in case there's members of the public who are interested but just simply don't have time to read the 87-page science plan. And when we've addressed all that feedback, we'll release a final version, which will probably be summer or fall this year. And I look forward to making that announcement here at that time. Next slide, please. Okay, something else to have on your radar is our Bay Delta Science Conference. We host this every 2 years. It's a flagship event. Sometimes 1,000, we have a recurring about 1,000 members of the community attend, maybe more this year. It's been scheduled right now for early fall in Sacramento Convention Center, and we have 2 co-chairs selected. We could not be happier to announce that Renee Henry from Trout Unlimited and Letitia Grenier from the Public Policy Institute of California will be the co-chairs, and they're leading the collaborative effort that drives the direction and the impact of the conference. We're just now gathering people for the planning team, so please consider contributing and write to us. There's an email here if you want to be part of the planning team. Some of the things we expect to see this year to meet this moment are some specific science to policy tracks and also sessions that advance collaborative and nimble use of open data with novel approaches in this very complex system. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so speaking of data science, we've kept up our collaboration with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at the University of California, Santa Barbara. They'll be coming here for training sessions in March and June, or through June, and they're going to be advising our next generation of scientists and advising us on skill sets to optimize the use of these rich data sets that we've been collecting here in the Delta. As you may know, many water board staff have engaged in the past and even now. We have many mentors joining us from the water board on topics that we're focusing on this year, which include harmful algal blooms and salmon recovery and carbon sequestration in terms of climate assessments in particular. So NCEAS has been a very productive collaboration since we started this about 5 years ago. The teams create both synthesized data sets, sometimes more than 20 years of data, and then also high-profile publications. And those are tools that we can use to quantify impacts and trends and help us make sense of all of that data. Things like water temperature changes over time. Sam Bashevkin on your staff was a leader in that. And then also things like habitat benefits from floodplain rewetting, like in the Yoel bypass that you're seeing right now. And so we have actually a paper that's hot off the press that we're going to be highlighting in council tomorrow, in case you're interested in seeing how all this flooding is actually leading to benefits for fish. And the Delta Water Master is also presenting tomorrow, so that's another reason to tune in. Next slide, please. So another successful collaborative effort we've been incubating is this Delta Modeling Collaboratory. It's like a shared science center without walls, something that we think of as a science hub that was brought up by the Delta Water Master earlier. We've had 3 projects this past year scoping profiles for critical questions that are associated with challenges that we've identified and affecting our co-equal goals. And these integrated teams are exploring the scale of questions and the types of approaches and tools that can move the needle for challenges like harmful algal bloom production, salinity intrusion management, and tidal wetland food webs, and especially the role of restoration in supporting them. So you can see on the left some from a poster that Dr. Michelle Stern put together for the State of the Estuary meeting in Oakland in October of last year. She's one of our newest hires, and she's really leading the effort to keep these teams integrated and making progress. The other thing that she has done besides highlighting some winning, win-win-win investments between those 3 efforts that I just described, things like QA/QC data that's been curated and make it easy for people to use, bathymetry, develop digital elevation models, things like this that are the foundations of moving forward in collaborative settings. In addition to that, she's put in a proposal for a session at QEMF that Will just mentioned. So the California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum is really where a lot of this collaborative work started 30 years ago. And so we have an opportunity to push forward on that this year in April. And one setting, though, right smack in the middle, is one that you may not know of. It was a collaboratory session that I hosted at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting that was in New Orleans in December. We were able to generate lessons learned from a wide range of different collaboratories across the U.S. that are all using open data and inclusive science approaches that deal with water management in places like the northeast coast of the U.S., the Chesapeake Bay, the Louisiana and the Gulf, the Colorado River Basin, and then here closer to home, we had UC's Co-Equal, the Water Allocation Collaboratory, in attendance, and then Maggie Chrisman, our Delta Science Program Manager, there to share our trajectory and what we've been learning. And it was an inspiring and eye-opening experience to hear from all of these groups the similarities, but also some differences in where things were, some different approaches to and adaptations that work to keep momentum when people that are working together enter something that somebody termed the groan zone. So just ways to keep momentum moving when things seem like they're too difficult or too much work. I think the benefits pay off in the end in each of these cases. The other thing I want to highlight about AGU and the point about being there at this very particular time in history was there was a chance to hear from leaders about the importance of trust and this theme of science connecting us, not dividing us. I came away with a lot of hope and inspiration that we can keep this two-way dialogue with the public and with policymakers to make sure that what we as scientists are generating is actually helping people peer into the future for more confident decision-making, whether it's personal or public. So that was one inspiring part of that meeting. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let me finish up this report by highlighting more science guidance that's coming by the way of the Independent Science Board. You may be aware of the current reviews that are happening on land subsidence, contaminants, DMDU, or decision-making under deep uncertainty, and climate science. In particular, how the science of these topics is understood and how it's used for decision-making in the Delta. Progress and publications are moving forward for each of these topics. At December's ISB meeting, 4 new topics were chosen for reviews. They are understanding harmful algal bloom events and responses, and then understanding the role of structured decision-making, nature-based solutions, and collaborative science in adaptive management here in the Delta. And I'm going to highlight the subsidence and contaminants review. Next slide, please, because there's some news to preview. Since the comment period closed in December, we know a little bit about what's coming with the subsidence review. They're still collating all of that feedback, but there was a workshop in the fall of 2023, and then there's much discussion since then that's really highlighted the state of science and where there's critical gaps still in our understanding of how to deal with and respond to subsidence. The magnitude of elevation lost really is staggering. Again, many of these islands are more than 20 feet below sea level. It's due to oxidation of peat soils, and that releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as opposed to taking it up into the soils. Next slide, please. And so while the ISB definitely highlights research needs, both on physical and economic concerns, they've also pointed to a lack of coordination, to which point I have to call out the recent response of the Delta Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy to organize a cross-agency Delta Carbon team. It already has about 40 members, and we have such a deep bench of knowledge here in the Delta community, and folks have really risen to the occasion to start to pull together what we know and how it can help move the needle for a future that's more sustainable. Now, funding could be sustained. We might be able to move that ball forward more quickly for a long-term solution, such as through carbon markets. But there's going to be a symposium at UC Davis organized by us and the Coastal and Marine Science Institute. And that's on March 5th. So we'll be discussing that then. I'm not going to put too much more about that here, but stay tuned. And if you're interested, please follow up with us. Next slide, please. Okay, and for the contaminants review, the goal is primarily to assess current monitoring programs for their strengths and weaknesses. They want to understand toxicological effects on ecosystems, which is a term we often call ecotoxicology. This is a deep dive to understand not just what toxins are out there and what methods and findings are emerging, but it's especially focused on how the data is used for decisions. There's a postdoctoral fellow that's been appointed now. So the review is moving forward, and they've been conducting interviews with experts. I hope to share more about this at the next quarterly report because I know emerging contaminants is of interest to the board. So next slide, please. I'll just close by saying, those are our main products that I want to highlight today. That we're working on these now, and we hope to be working on them with you and also on other topics in the future. We hope they're useful. And our goal always is to bring the best possible scientific models, scientific data, and scientific approaches to bear on the questions that you're all grappling with on a day-to-day basis. So, feedback from you is very helpful to us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wyndham Myers. Thank you for being such a fundamental partner to us in all this. I definitely have additional reading now on my list to do, as I always do after you present before us. But also thank you for your just message at the top around how easy it is to take for granted all that we have built these decades collectively together between state, federal, and local partners when it comes to the science programs that we have. It's easy to I know I've seen some recent graphs as to the amount of cuts that our federal science agencies have taken, and it is not a good number to see, and it is exactly at the wrong time to be seeing those sorts of cuts. So I appreciate your focus on the work that is continuing to go on, how we continue to remain focused on the need to bolster our scientific understanding of what's going on, but importantly, connect it to the policy decisions that we're all making here. So just thank you for your continued leadership and eye on all of this. It's certainly, I feel, requiring us here at the state and local levels to understand how we just ensure that we don't skip a beat, that we continue to have both the data sets, but also the scientific funding and work that we need. And to your point on the collaboratory, I guess my question would be where you see all of that kind of headed. When I look at the Chesapeake program and some of the other watersheds out there, it feels like they're a bit more advanced insofar as the actual infrastructure that a collaboratory needs and would have. And to your point, there is the Co-Equal project, which is great because I think it has momentum. But there's also, to your point, I think a few other groups collectively also trying to do the same in the Delta space, and just wondering how you see all these kind of threads coming together and what the model in the future might be. I know there was at some point, I believe, some hope that the feds would invest in kind of a collective science center, but that's probably not going to be happening soon. So just wondering what your insights might be as to where we're going and how we might continue to build a foundation and framework on a collaboratory that I feel the Delta definitely needs on par with Chesapeake and other places out there.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Where I see this going is the general vibe is everybody wants to collaborate. There's not, the only reason I brought up the groan zone is that the first step is to recognize these things take time. So if your goal is efficiency, you move fast, right? I mean, but you're not going to be nimble in the future if you haven't built those relationships that allow things to continue. So all of these collaboratory efforts that I talk about here in California are connected. These are people talking to each other with the same goals, the same concerns, the same needs. Things like fundamental baseline clarity on assumptions that are in the models and quality assurance and quality control on data that people trust and they can use right off the shelf. These are the things that make things move quickly and be effective and then get picked up and run with the next, you can pass the baton very easily. So there's going to be a release, I believe, from CoEqual this summer of some of their model runs, which are basically going to be flat files that anybody can look at to see the results of a particular test. And once those are then published, the next group can use those to ask another question that might be about harmful algal blooms or something else. So all of these topics can integrate with each other if we have the same base to them to work from, and building that it's not that heavy of a lift to get that started, even if it's not a full building and a beautiful infrastructure. It's the culture of collaboration that we're trying to not just build but keep moving, because it's already happening. The Interagency Ecological Program has done a lot of this heavy lifting already as well. So here it's moving forward. In other parts of the country it is as well. So you can just see the winds are in the sails of this right now, and so I don't see anything really stopping it except for funding constraints that really make it impossible or even requirements that people don't coordinate or don't collaborate across agencies. These kinds of things can put brakes on it, but they're not really going to stop the overall momentum, because it's really where the future is.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the need to better standardize data standards, but also process and to your point, the sort of the people framework, let alone the physical infrastructure and funding that's needed. But I feel like we're in a really important spot. So just thank you for that leadership and appreciate the comments. Looking to fellow board colleagues. Vice Chair.
Just a follow-up on the subsidence topic. And you may not have this information, but over what time frame did that map refer to?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The map is showing the current status of the elevation of delta lands within the legal delta. And so basically that oxidation mostly kicked in, following the Swamplands Act in 1850, 1852. And then you can see we don't have the data to show us the initial rates and then the final rates, but there's some places in the delta that are still subsiding very fast. There's some that have, the subsidence has stopped a bit because the soils are less organic now. They're more mineral because all the organic material blew off. So they're slowing down their rate of subsidence. But that said, there's still places that are losing 4 inches a year. It's still there are organic soils that are under that kind of a stress. But again, it's more like in the center of the islands where it's more organic and there's less mineral structure to hold it.
Okay, thank you.
Looking to other board members in case there's other questions or comments. Seeing none. Thank you again. Really appreciate you all. All right, that wraps up item number 4 and brings us to item number 5, which is an item from our Division of Financial Assistance regarding an amended expedited drinking water grant funding program.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Board
Good to
Chair
see you.
Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Eric Uppel. I'm a Senior Water Resource Control Engineer in the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, or OSWS branch within the Division of Financial Assistance. I'm accompanied by my supervisor, Jasmine Mohaka, to my immediate left, and our Office of Chief Counsel, Jean Fung. And today I'll be presenting amendments to the Expedited Drinking Water Grant, or EDWG, program guidelines. Next slide, please. So the first portion of today's presentation will provide a background on the original guidelines that were adopted in 2023, give a status on the EDWG funding thus far, and highlight the proposed changes that will be incorporated in the amendment to the guidelines. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the EDWG guidelines were originally adopted in March 2023. The program is an alternative funding pathway to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or Drinking Water SRF program, and has a streamlined initial application to expedite the execution of funding agreements. The initial application has approximately 6 attachments and allows for additional documents and reviews to be submitted and completed after the execution of initial funding agreement. Most notably, the financial and environmental reviews for construction projects can occur after the execution of a funding agreement. The original guidelines included the following eligible applicants: community water systems owned by public agencies, California Public Utility Commission or CPUC regulated community water systems, and systems owned by public school districts. Eligible projects included construction projects eligible per the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund policy or the intended use plan. And we also added additional requirements that the projects had to benefit small communities, had to address category A through D or consolidation projects, and had a maximum cost of $15 million. We utilized specifically state funding sources, specifically Prop 1 and 68, Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, and the General Fund infrastructure appropriations. In general, the EDWG program was targeting shovel-ready projects, entities, types that required less application submittals, funding sources that had less requirements to help expedite the execution of funding agreements. Next slide, please. So far, EDWG has piloted 5 rounds of funding, which have been invite-only to existing drinking water SRF construction applications or construction projects stemming from our technical assistance program or planning projects. 4 rounds have already been administered, and DFA is currently reviewing and processing round 5. For the 4 rounds that we have administered, we have executed 36 total projects for approximately $175 million. The median processing time, which is the time from receiving a complete application to executing an initial agreement, is approximately 175 days or less than 6 months. This is approximately 4 months faster than projects that are funded under the Drinking Water SRF program in the OSWIS branch. Additionally, we've been receiving complete applications for this program slightly over a month, approximately 36 days, which is significantly faster than projects submitting applications under the Drinking Water SRF program in the OSWIS branch. Of the 36 projects that we funded in the first 4 rounds, 19 of the projects have already gone out to bid, and 2 have already completed construction. This is a comparable rate to what we've seen for projects funded under the Drinking Water SRF program in the OSWIS branch as well. Next slide, please. So due to the overall success of the first 5 rounds of funding, DFA wants to ultimately expand the program, opening it up to more eligible entities, projects, and allow interested water systems to apply for the program rather than administering rounds of funding. Here's a summary of the changes to the guidelines that we are proposing. For eligible applicants, we're expanding the program to include water systems owned by mutual water companies. For eligible projects, we are aligning the eligibility with the Drinking Water SRF IUP and removing reference to community size, project categories, and the $15 million cost cap. We're adding more funding sources, including Drinking Water SRF Principal Forgiveness, the Budget Act of 2024 Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and Proposition 4. We are adding language to allow open submission process for interested water systems, and we are adding reference to advanced payment being eligible for the program for interested parties as well. Next slide, please. The remaining portion of the presentation will discuss the comments that have been received and the revisions that have occurred after receiving public comments. Next slide, please. So regarding public process, DFA conducted a drinking water SRF IUP public workshop on July 16th, 2025, where proposed EDWG revisions were noted. Additionally, DFA posted the draft amended guidelines for public comment on November 19th, 2025. During the public comment period, we received 2 letters, one from the California Association of Mutual Water Companies and one from the City of Los Banos. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of the comments received. Regarding funding eligibility and access, DFA received support for expanded eligibility to mutual water companies. Regarding the alignment with the drinking water SRF IUP, DFA received support for the shift as it makes projects addressing hexavalent chromium contamination and medium-sized systems serving disadvantaged communities eligible for the program based on the current IUP. Regarding the funding process and communication, there was support for the removal of burials in the initial funding agreement application and recommendation for continued process improvements. Additionally, there was encouragement on clarifying how eligible systems will be notified and improving coordination among the different funding programs, such as the Technical Assistance Program. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of the revisions after receiving the comments. In general, minor text clarifications were made to add abbreviations and indicate when process items may occur. Regarding funding sources, we updated language related to Prop 4 funds to be administered throughout these guidelines if allowed by applicable laws, and updated the reporting requirements to indicate that special reporting requirements would be applicable for projects funded by the Budget Act of 2024 funds. Regarding project selection, the language is updated to allow a shift to open submission process rather than administering funds in rounds. Additionally, we pushed back some submittal requirements to after projects have gone out to bid rather than prior. Next slide, please. Regarding the reimbursement of costs, language was allowed to allow flexibility on the compliance with special conditions. And lastly, DFA staff will notify interested parties and eligible parties of when the EDWG guidelines are formally amended and when they can apply for the program. DFA is still continuing to identify and implement ways to simplify and streamline the funding process. Next slide, please. And that's the conclusion of today's presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Uppel, Ms. Oaxaca, Ms. Fung. Really appreciate the great work that's gone into this. And appreciate the review of how the program has gone so far, Expedited Drinking Water Program. Agree with all the expansions here, and just thanks. Really appreciate the good work that's gone into it. I don't have any questions, but looking to fellow board colleagues. Board Member Firestone.
Thanks. Yeah, and I don't have any questions and agree. This is a great continued refinement and expansion to a program that I think really exemplifies the State Water Board's approach to trying to continually improve and streamline and problem solve to get projects done faster and to ultimately ensure people are getting safe and reliable, clean water in their communities as quickly as possible. There's a lot of learning, infrastructure projects always take longer than we'd like, but anything we can do to support communities that need that state assistance to be able to keep that momentum going and identify barriers that might slow that down and provide that flexibility for how they can keep things moving while still meeting the needs we have as a state. So I just really appreciate the whole approach that our staff have been doing. I appreciate the learning that's gone on. And also just want to note, because I think this exemplifies how I know this board has said we want to make sure that those communities that have Chrome 6 can afford to address it. And this helps further that as well, this expansion. And just generally making sure that we're better aligning or continuing to align our different funding programs to provide as much flexibility and streamlining as possible. So appreciate everyone's work.
Here. Thank you, board member. Seeing any other comments? We don't have commenters on this item, and so I think we may be prepared for a motion.
I'll move to adopt.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Board Member Morgan. Aye. Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
And Chair Escabel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The vote is unanimous, and the expedited drinking water program updates are adopted. Thank you. Really appreciate the great work.
Thank you.
All right. Next, let's go ahead and just give ourselves a quick, just 5-minute break, and we can swap out. Our next item is item number 6, and we'll hear from the Administrative Hearings Office regarding a petition for long-term transfer by the Yuba County Water Agency. And thanks, folks, for the patience and hanging on. I know we have a number of folks for this item, and we had a few items before, so it's appreciated. But let's just give ourselves a quick 5-minute break, and we'll come here. We'll start in at about 10:40. Thank you, everyone. All right, everyone, we are missing a key staffer right now, so we're going to go ahead and give ourselves another 5 minutes or so, and so they can arrive. Thank you. All right, I think we can get started now. Thank you, everyone, for the patience. It's good to see you this morning, Ms. Kenzie.
Good morning, and thank you. You are on fire this morning getting things done. So here we go. We'll start off with introducing myself. My name is Nicole Kinsey. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the Administrative Hearings Office, which I will likely refer to as the AHO throughout this presentation. I am presenting today a proposed order with an associated change sheet number 1. There are also a few very minor editorial changes that I will read into the record at the very end. And I am presenting those to you for approval. If adopted, this would approve the Yuba County Water Agency long-term transfer petition under Water Rate Permit 15026. Also, as by way of background, as the parties to this proceeding who may be here are undoubtedly quite aware, I did not preside over the hearing in this matter. The hearing was conducted by Hearing Officer Sam Bivens, and the proposed order was likewise prepared by Hearing Officer Bivens. Mr. Bivens has, for the time being, exited state service, so I have the honor of presenting this proposed order to you today. I'm also joined by Supervising Water Resources Control Engineer Sam Bolin Bryan, who provided technical support to the hearing officer in this proceeding. If we can go to slide 2, please. I wanted to provide hopefully very briefly, some context for the petition for the renewal of the long-term transfer filed by Yuba County Water Agency. First of all, Yuba County Water Agency, or YWCA, holds a water right permit issued by the State Water Board that authorizes diversion and storage of water in New Bullards Bar Reservoir on the Yuba River. as well as direct diversion of water from the Yuba River at locations downstream of New Bullards Bar Dam. Revised Water Right Decision 1644, which was issued in 2003, established in-stream flow requirements for the protection of fisheries in the lower Yuba River. If we can go to the next slide, and then I'm going to ask to switch back, but the next slide is a map. You can see New Bullard Bar Reservoir. It's the largest reservoir there on the North Fork of the Yuba River, kind of a little bit to the left, but in the middle of the screen here, left from my point of view. And that's New Bullard Bar Reservoir, and the portion of the Yuba River we're referring to is downstream of that dam. And if you look all the way down in the left-hand corner, you see Marysville, and just upstream of that, the Marysville Gauge. And that would be the lowest portion of where the in-stream flow requirements are measured. So that's the stretch of the Yuba River that we're referring to in this proceeding with respect to in-stream flows. Can we please go to the slide number 2? Thank you, perfect. After issuance of a Water Right Decision 1644 and the commencement of associated litigation with that proceeding, YCWA, water purveyors along the Yuba River, and the Department of Water Resources, Bureau of Reclamation, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as a number of environmental NGOs, reached an agreement known as the Lower Yuba River Accord. That accord settled in-stream flow requirements, as well as several other matters, and included a number of agreements that make up the accord as a whole. To allow implementation of the accord, Yuba County Water Agency filed a petition for change and a petition for long-term transfer. If we can move forward to slide 4, so we'll skip the map. We took a look at that. Thank you. The State Water Board approved those petitions in Order 2008-0014, authorizing the prior long-term transfer and implementing the Yuba Accord fishery flows. The order authorized transfer of up to 200,000 acre-feet and added Clifton Court Forebay and Jones Pumping Plant as points of rediversion under Yuba Water's permit to authorize south of Delta exports. Water was made available for the transfer through releases from New Bullards Bar Reservoir and by groundwater substitution, and this water was then rediverted downstream by transfer participants for beneficial use. The transfer included a number of conditions to protect legal users of water and in-stream beneficial uses that might otherwise be affected by those additional exports. These requirements included compliance with Decision 1641, biological opinions governing operations of the Delta pumps, limitations on transfers between December and June, reservations of authority to address future uncertainties, and requirements for carriage water. Next slide, please. Since the issuance of Order 2008-0014, the board has authorized additional points of rediversion of the transfer water, including points of rediversion at Freeport and San Luis Reservoir, and temporary approvals of points of rediversion for Contra Costa Water District. Approximately 1.2 million acre-feet have been transferred since 2008, resulting in over $100 million in revenue for Yuba County Water Agency, which has helped to fund flood control and habitat projects. The approval for the prior transfer program expired on December 31st, 2025. Next slide, please. The pending petition before you seeks to renew the prior transfer program. That petition was filed on April 4th, 2024. It seeks a 25-year extension of the program until December 31st, 2050. And YCWA has completed CEQA certifying a supplemental EIR on September 17th, 2024. Next slide, please. The pending petition proposes to maintain the same general structure and conditions of approval that were in Order 2008-0014. There are no proposed changes in the place of use or purpose of use. The petition adds a streamflow depletion factor for groundwater substitution transfers to account for reductions in stream flow over time from additional seepage to the groundwater basin that may occur as a result of additional pumping. When applying the stream flow depletion factor, the amount of surface water made available for transfer by groundwater pumping is correspondingly less than the amount of foregone surface water diversions. The Contra Costa Water District diversion facilities and other temporarily approved points of rediversion would be made permanent points of rediversion. And the petition clarifies that regulatory releases of water from Nevada Irrigation District's Yuba Bear project or PG&E's Drum Spalding project will be part of baseline conditions and not transferable water. Next slide, please. Yuba Water's petition was assigned to the AHO on December 24th, 2024. A hearing was held on July 14th, 15th, and 21st, and August 19th and 21st, 2025. Parties to that proceeding included Yuba County Water Agency, state water contractors, Department of Water Resources, several NGO parties representing environmental interests, as well as Delta interests. Next slide, please. This slide is just a brief overview and reminder of the provisions in the Water Code that govern transfers. This include declarations of policy and requirements for approval of long-term transfers. Water Code Section 1736, governing the board's approval of the transfer petition before you, states that the board may approve a long-term transfer petition if doing so would not injure other legal users of water and not unreasonably affect in-stream beneficial uses. Water Code Section 386 states water right changes for transfer must avoid injury to other legal users, not unreasonably affect in-stream beneficial uses, and not unreasonably affect the economy of the area from which the water is transferred. And finally, as a policy matter, Water Code Section 109 declares that the growing water needs of the state require the use of water in an efficient manner, and that the efficient use of water requires certainty in the definition of property rights to the use of water and transferability of such rights. It is hereby declared to be the established policy of the state to facilitate the voluntary transfer of water and water rights where consistent with the public welfare of the place of export and the place of import. Next slide, please. The parties had the opportunity to comment on a draft of the proposed order. That was a courtesy draft, if you will, that was circulated prior to submission of the proposed order to the board. And many of those comments that were made by the parties were addressed in the proposed order that ultimately was submitted. Next slide, please. Parties and interested members of the public had the opportunity to comment on the proposed order that was submitted to the board. In this slide, I've addressed here the Delta parties' comments. They raised several comments which tracked the points made in their closing brief as well. First, the Delta parties objected that the 2018 Bay Delta Plan salinity objectives are not yet implemented and therefore not effective. In addition, YCWA violated the conditions of the prior long-term transfer, and finally raised the objection that exports degrade Southern Delta water levels and water quality. In general, the proposed order responds that the salinity objectives in the 2018 Bay Delta Plan were validly adopted and are applicable and appropriate to apply pursuant to this order. Given the relaxation of salinity objectives under consideration and ultimately adopted in the 2018 Bay Delta Plan update, the board has generally declined to strictly enforce the prior more stringent standards where they appear as permit conditions. And that explains the alleged violations of some of the alleged violations of the conditions of the prior long-term transfer. And there's a fairly detailed discussion in the proposed order before you on that point. And finally, the record in this proceeding did not demonstrate a likelihood of injury from the transfer with the conditions as presented to you in this proposed order. Next slide, please. In addition, the NGO parties raised several comments. In general, there were raised concerns that future temporary urgency change orders, or TUCOs, could relax permit conditions as has been done in the past. There was an objection to the approval of a transfer of water that's required to be released to meet in-stream flow requirements. And in response, under the proposed order, transfers are conditioned directly on attainment of water quality objectives. Therefore, relaxation of the D1641 standards applicable to the SWP and CVP would not relax conditions for transfers under the permit at issue here. Yuba County Water Agency would need to attain its own temporary urgency change order for this permit, permit 15026, in order to relax any conditions on transfers under the permit. Approval of future filed temporary urgency change petitions must be considered in context by the board. You are not able to bind a future board in that regard. So there is some element of a circular argument here to include as a condition in this permit a directive that the permit conditions cannot be modified because they can through the statutory process under Water Code Section 1435. However, any such proposal would have to meet those statutory requirements. and would be considered by the board when presented in a particular context. Finally, in response to the NGO's objection about transfer of water used to meet in-stream flow requirements, the transfer water released from New Bullards Bar Reservoir pursuant to this transfer will be used to meet in-stream flow requirements in the lower Yuba River, which I pointed out to you, which is the relevant reach where the flows were required by Decision 1644. And that would occur prior to any rediversion that may occur within the delta. Allowing for the transfer of water released to meet in-stream flow requirements after those flows have met their intended purpose continues the conditions that were applicable under the prior transfer. It supports the Yuba Accord and creates an incentive for similarly beneficial arrangements in other contexts. Next slide, please. Finally, several non-party NGOs, this includes San Francisco Baykeeper, Restore the Delta, and Golden State Salmon Association, submitted comments as interested persons on the proposed order. This comment letter raised a concern that the proposed order fails to acknowledge the difference in application of Water Code Section 1736, which applies to the approval of the long-term transfers, and Water Code Section 1435, which applies to the approval of a temporary urgency change petition. The relevant provisions regarding the avoidance of unreasonable effects on fish, wildlife, or other in-stream beneficial uses have nearly identical language in these two statutory provisions, and I agree with the commenters that there is, however, a distinction in the practical application of these two provisions and the standards embodied in these two provisions, because each approval must consider the particular context of that particular approval. An approval of a long-term transfer approves a transfer that may occur over a lengthy period of time, in this case, 25 years, which requires different considerations than approval of a TUCP, which expires after, as you know, 180 days, and may only be approved if there is an urgent need. The proposed order notes that the standards are textually the same, but acknowledges that relevant circumstances apply to these standards, stating on page 18 of the order that in approving a TUCP, the board must evaluate whether the change would unreasonably affect fish, wildlife, or other in-stream beneficial uses under the circumstances. So I believe that the order does address this issue that was raised by these commenting parties. Finally, the interested NGO commenters raised again the concerns about use and approval of TUCPs generally, which was similar to the NGO parties who had raised similar comments and I previously responded to. Next slide, please. We also received a number of comment letters in support of approval of the petition. These are listed here, including the two parties, Yuba County Water Agency and state water contractors, as well as 10 additional letters from non-parties that you can see listed here in this slide. Next slide, please. In addition to change sheet 1, which was circulated last week, I have a few additional very minor editorial changes to the proposed order. I did want to read those off to you very briefly and hopefully efficiently. On page 4 of these are all minor editorial, but you're welcome to track. On page 4 of the proposed order, item 2, we would insert after Nevada Irrigation District the parenthetical NID, so as to define the acronym for purposes of the rest of the order. On page 30, the fourth bullet item, there is a typographical error. The order currently states PGE and E, which should be PG and E. There's an extra E that will be removed. On page 34, item 10, San Joaquin is misspelled. There should be an A inserted into Joaquin. Sorry.
It's slightly painful, but it's fine.
Page 38, there is an extra space. Oh, I'm sorry. Item 24F, there's an extra space between Sacramento and San Joaquin, which should be deleted. And with that, I will return to this slide, which is that the board has several options in acting on the proposed order under Water Code Section 1114. The board may adopt the proposed order as modified by change sheet 1 and with the changes that I just read into the record for you. The board may make technical or other minor changes in the proposed order. You may reject and remand the proposed order to the AHO, or you may reject the proposed order and decide the case for yourselves. All options before you. If we can go to the next slide, which is a pretty picture of the Yuba River, as I understand. If you have any questions, I will, of course, do my best to answer those with the able assistance of Mr. Boland Bryan, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Presiding Officer Kinsey. And just at the top, an incredible amount of appreciation. Obviously, this project was referred to the AHO. It's not part of your statutory work. There are a number of significant items at the Administrative Hearings Office, and I couldn't imagine us being able to conduct our work as thoroughly, as transparently, and as diligently without you and your colleagues. And so just a lot of appreciation here at the top. I don't have any questions, and also appreciation, I will say, to Mr. Bivens in absence and all his work on this item. I don't have any questions off the top. I know we do have a number of commenters, about 8 or so, but looking to fellow board colleagues if they have anything here before we hear from feedback from folks. Seeing none, we can go, and our first commenter will be Willie Whittlesey, be followed by Ryan Becerra, then Eric Boucher, and Chuck Sater. Should just be on.
Thanks for the instructions on the mic. Chair Esquivel, board members, good morning. I'm Willie Whittlesey, General Manager of Yuba Water. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning to express our strong support for the proposed order, which will extend the points of diversion and places of use associated with the Lower Yuba River Accord for 25 years. I also want to thank Nicole for sitting in for Sam. I know you didn't work on this, but you did a great job summarizing that. I didn't realize that was going to happen today, but thank you for that, and thanks, Sam. Since the mid-2000s, the Yuba Accord has provided important benefits and advanced a suite of broadly shared priorities. For the environment, the Accord established science-based minimum in-stream flows to protect spring run Chinook salmon and steelhead trout, using a flexible framework that adjusts based on annual hydrology, reflecting years of work of a team of biologists from Yuba Water, state and federal resource agencies, and NGOs. For Californians across the state, the Accord provides a reliable source of water to improve statewide water supplies, especially in dry years. I appreciate that many of the public agencies who benefit from the Accord submitted letters of support to the board that highlight the importance of this supply to the communities they serve. And in Yuba County, the Accord integrates surface water and groundwater management to ensure local agricultural needs can be met while maintaining hydropower production to support Yuba Water's primary mission of flood risk reduction. As highlighted in the proposed order, the revenues generated by the Accord have been a critical source of funding for both flood control and habitat enhancement projects in Yuba County. The proposed order before you today is the product of not only the collaborative efforts of the original signatories and the state board's action approving the Accord in 2008, it is also a product of the nearly 2 decades of shared experience we now have. The Accord and its accounting mechanisms provide a proven foundation for managing water resources for multiple beneficial uses in the face of the dynamic and unpredictable nature of California's hydrology. Importantly, and I want to emphasize this point, the proposed order is also a product of the comprehensive efforts of the State Water Board's petition process, as you heard from Nicole this morning. The Administrative Hearings Office dedicated significant time, effort, and attention in considering the issues presented by Yuba Water and the petitioners, and the proposed order reflects that thoughtful, deliberate, and comprehensive process. We appreciate the State Board's consideration and strongly support adoption of the proposed order before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whittlesey. Next, I'd like to call up Ryan Becerra, be followed by Eric Boucher.
Thank you very much, Chair Esquivel and board members. Ryan Becerra, attorney for Yuba County Water Agency. I want to second the chair's commendation of the Administrative Hearings Office. Obviously, we were seeking to minimize the length of time that might elapse between the end of the previous term of the Accord and a renewal. And so, we requested the Administrative Hearing Office attempt to expedite this hearing, and they did, and they had very efficient and comprehensive hearing, and we very much appreciate. We know how much work Ms. Kinsey and the staff have on other proceedings, and we very much appreciate this comprehensive order coming out quite rapidly after the hearing. So thank you very much. We, of course, didn't get 1,000% of everything we proposed, but that is how the world works. And this is a comprehensive order that I think deals with the issues quite well. And obviously, since my client supports it, I support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. Next, I'd like to call up Eric Boucher, be followed by Chuck Seidler.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, members of the board, and presiding hearing officer Kinsey. I'm Eric Busher with San Francisco Baykeeper. As Ms. Kinsey noted, last week, Baykeeper, Golden State Salmon Association, and Restore the Delta submitted a letter about the draft order's flawed rejection of the requests by protesting parties for conditions on approval of the petition to prevent water transfers during temporary urgency change orders, or in the alternative to impose consequences and mitigation measure or mitigation requirements in the event such transfers are allowed to take place. I'd like to speak briefly about the import of the board rejecting at least that portion of the draft order, especially in light of Ms. Kinsey's comments this morning. In setting requirements under water rights or water quality control plans, the board identifies what is necessary for the reasonable protection of beneficial uses. When a temporary urgency change order is adopted and in effect in the Bay Delta watershed, especially at the request of DWR or the Bureau of Reclamation for State Water Project or Central Valley Project operations, those needs for reasonable protection of fish and wildlife and in-stream uses of water are, by definition, not being met. While Baykeeper and our partners have had fundamental problems with this board's adoption and use of temporary urgency change orders for the projects in 6 of the last 12 years, we have generally agreed on at least this much. Emergencies and normal long-term operating conditions are not the same. The board can and has adopted requirements based on urgent needs that deviate from what would normally constitute reasonable protection. But the board has also recognized that doing so has, one, fundamentally harmed fish and wildlife, for example, causing significant mortality to winter-run Chinook salmon in the mid-2010s and to other species at other times, and two, that relying on TUCOs anytime there is a drought, a dry period in a wet year, or a desire by the water projects to deviate from normal operating conditions and standards is bad public policy, is unsustainable, and should be discouraged and avoided. The draft order, rather than accounting for the reality that TUCOs do not offer reasonable protection of fish and in-stream uses of water, and pushing forward the board's goal to wean itself and water users off of TUCOs in favor of robust and sustainable long-term drought planning, equates what is unreasonable under normal conditions with what is unreasonable in emergencies, describing them as, quote, essentially the same. Whatever Baykeeper, our partners, Yuba Water, or this board think of whether 25 years of long-term transfers of 200,000 acre-feet of water are reasonable or not, the answer to that question cannot be de facto or necessarily the same as the answer to whether that same transfer and conduct is reasonable in an emergency. Whether transferring water when beneficial use requirements are being met as in the public interest is a fundamentally different inquiry to whether doing so when in-stream uses are not protected is the same. In response to Ms. Kinsey's comments this morning and the responses to our letter during the presentation, I heard broad agreement with this general position that emergencies are different. But the reference to the language on page 18, we do not view as nearly as clear as Ms. Kinsey indicated. And I would urge the board to look very closely at that language in the first full paragraph on that page and to ensure that it is clarified to avoid any confusion or implication about whether those standards are, quote, essentially the same. And second, while I disagree with Ms. Kinsey that barring transfers during future temporary urgency change orders would constrain or bind a future board in any inappropriate way, or that it is circular in nature, as the protesting parties to the petition requested, a consequence or a mitigation requirement for those transfers avoids that purported problem and purported circularity. Let me conclude by saying that this is not a one-off issue, and it is not one the board can or should take lightly. You will be asked to grapple with these issues in the near and long-term far-off future. your consideration of the voluntary agreements of Phase 2 of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, of implementation of Phases 1 and 2 of the Bay Delta Plan, of whether to approve new water rights for new water infrastructure like Sites Reservoir or the tunnel, and your consideration of how to make sure that DWR and the Trump administration meet their obligations in State Water Project and Central Valley Project operations will force the board to revisit the question of whether what is normal and what is based on an urgent need are the same. They are not. As we detailed in our letter, there is substantial authority in California law, both related specifically to water and much more broadly, that requires rejecting the AHO's draft order, or the draft order's conclusion that what is reasonable must ignore the context around it. Emergencies are different. The draft order on this petition should clearly and directly say so. I thank you again for your time this morning, and I'm happy to answer any questions that board members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Buscher. Appreciate your engagement on this proceeding and your points here. Much appreciated. Thank you for the continued engagement. Next, I'd like to call up Chuck Seidler, be followed by Eric Sutherland.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Chuck Seidler, and I'm from Sacramento. I have traveled to the Yuba River for recreation for many years and believe healthy recreation requires a healthy river ecosystem. Yuba Water Agency has had the unique privilege of being able to sell the flows that it releases for environmental purposes. These flows were negotiated to save Yuba salmon, but Yuba salmon populations have not meaningfully improved. Meanwhile, Yuba Water Agency, has made over $50 million in sales of water during a recent drought. I believe no public water agency should profit from a public emergency. I do support planning for droughts before drought emergencies occur. I support limitations on or mitigation for water transfers during drought emergencies to ensure a focus not on revenue, but on ecosystem health and increasing salmon populations. And I do thank you for your time today.
Thank you as well, Mr. Seidler. Appreciate those comments and your engagement here. Next, I'd like to call up Eric Sunderland, be followed by Chris Schutz, and then Keiko Mertz.
Good morning. My name is Eric Soderland. I'm here on behalf of the California Department of Water Resources, and my comments are really brief. I just want to kind of close the loop and just make sure that for the record, the Department of Water Resources supports the adoption of the proposed order and appreciates the AHO and the efforts at getting this hearing and process to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutherland. Next, I'd like to call up Chris Schutz, be followed by Keiko Mertz, and then I believe our last commenter here will be Megan Murphy.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel. Am I on?
You are. Good morning.
Good. Good morning, Chair Esquivel, Ms. Kenzie, and members of the board. Chris Schutz for the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, one of the protestants of the, one of the NGO protestants in the current hearing that's under consideration by you this morning. CSPA and allied NGOs protested the Yuba Accord long-term transfer petition to address several specific issues. Chief among those issues is the relation of this 25-year transfer program to temporary urgency change orders, or TUCOs, for Delta operations. YCWA's long-term transfer program is founded on the premise that it rides on top of Delta water quality and flow requirements placed on the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation for Delta operations. Our issue is what happens when DWR and Reclamation are not meeting the letter of those requirements. As you've heard discussed already, in each of the most recent dry year sequences, the board has issued TUCOs to DWR and Reclamation for Delta operations. The board has given no indication of changing its practice of granting such TUCOs or DWR in the future, despite discussing the option in several venues, including in orders granting TUCOs. The NGO protest stated as a dismissal term that transfers should not be allowed in years when TUCOs for Delta operations had been in effect. During hearing, YCWA and others questioned the principle of denying transfers during drought when water supply south of Delta is most in the shortest supply. And the hearing officer asked why YCWA would not simply apply for its own TUCO to allow transfers during drought emergencies if there was a condition in the granting order stating that such transfers would not be allowed. So, protestants refocused on devoting some of the revenues from transfers during droughts to improving conditions for fish. NGO protestants also focused on reducing transfers in years following drought emergencies when there had been TUCOs, and addressing those different conditions after the emergencies had ended so that TUCOs could not just simply programmatically eliminate them. The proposed order before you rejects even the mitigation and future transfer reduction approach. Instead, as it stands, at least as I understood it coming here this morning, it reaffirms the opportunity to object to any particular transfer authorized as part of a TUCO for Delta operations. I've personally objected to a lot of water transfers since 2007. I can say from personal experience that objecting to transfers case by case presents an exceptionally high bar. I've also objected to temporary urgency change petitions for Delta operations in 5 separate years. Addressing transfers in such conditions presents a bar that is largely unreachable. In a year's worth of discussions, workshops, and hearings regarding Delta TUCPs, the issue of water transfers is likely to get about 10 minutes of consideration. The proposed order states at page 18, footnote 9, while we appreciate the NGO party's procedural concerns about how TUCPs are processed, we lack authority to modify the standards and processes mandated by the legislature in Water Codes Section 1435 et sec. But the NGO protestants did not ask the board to use this order to modify the board's implementations of Water Code 1435 et sec. Further, the sections of the code, those sections of the code say nothing at all about water transfers. The legislature did not constrain the board here as is suggested in the order. In simple terms, the proposed order says that the board, in conditioning a long-term transfer, cannot plan for droughts. The proposed order states at page 21 that what it calls economic issues are off the table. Specifically, the proposed order states, in all other respects, the legislature has directed us to facilitate and encourage water transfers, quoting Water Code Section 109. But Water Code Section 109 does not tell the board to approve water transfers without limitations or conditions. Moreover, the legislature also directed in Water Code Section 85023 the long-standing constitutional principle of reasonable use and the public trust doctrine shall be the foundation of state water management and are particularly important and applicable to the Delta. Public trust balancing by its nature is in part an economic exercise. As pointed out in the comments of Baykeeper et al., the proposed order conflates reasonableness requirements under Water Code Sections 1435 and 1736. What's reasonable under emergency conditions is different than what's reasonable in a long-term time frame. What's reasonable and proper now is for the board to use this opportunity to address long-term transfers in drought conditions and these long-term transfers programmatically. I have seen a majority of the members of this board at one time or another state in session that the board needs to improve its planning for droughts and its operation during droughts. Now is your chance. There's another note that I thought was a small note, but I think it's a big note actually. Footnote 8 at the bottom of page 17, as what I said originally when I wrote this was that it's unintelligible. It does not communicate what Ms. Kenzie said this morning regarding YCWA's need to ask for its own TUCO or TUCP to petition with its own TUCP to ask for a TUCO to transfer water when a TUCO for Delta operations is in effect. My experience of previous TUCOs for Delta operations is that they deal with transfers programmatically. TUCOs in the record that we cited in our brief and in our comments did do that. They did deal with transfers programmatically. The AHO's explanation suggests otherwise, the explanation this morning, but that suggests to me that the AHO is saying that somehow there will be a change in the future in the way that Delta TUCOs address transfers, and that each individual transferor will have to get its own TUCO in such conditions. That would be different, and it seems cumbersome. Also, and this is relatively smaller, but it is important, at the bottom two paragraphs of page 21, continuing to the end of the carryover paragraph on page 22, these paragraphs have the potential to set a bad precedent that is unnecessary to this order's decision. As we stated in written comments, place of use matters. What is written in these paragraphs could be read to suggest otherwise. We request that you strike these two paragraphs. Now, in summing up, CSPA requests that the board direct staff to revise the proposed order to limit UBA Accord transfers during years when TUCOs have been in effect, or else to require mitigation for those transfers on a forward-thinking, programmatic basis. It's not a big ask. There is time for you to do this and clarify this and get it right. The Yuba County Water Agency is not going to miss out on any transfers. It has something that's already going as a temporary basis for this year. And I'm sure you're not going to take another year to finish this. And I agree with Mr. Becerra, at least on one thing, and that is the hearing was efficient and quick. And I will say that NGOs really worked hard to make their timeline work, and it was difficult for all of us. So thank you very much, and please consider making some changes here before you approve this order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Appreciate the engagement here and your comments. I know we will have further discussion here at the dais here in a moment, so thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Keiko Mertz, and then our last commenter again will be Megan Murphy.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, Ms. Kenzie, and members of the board. Keiko Mertz on behalf of Friends of the River. We were protestants in the water rights proceeding related to the proposed order before you today because we have a long history of advocating to protect the Yuba River and its resources, and because we saw potential for common sense improvements to water management for the Yuba, the Bay Delta, and beyond. I'll start my comments with a little bit of history. Friends of the River is actually a signatory to the Yuba Accord Fisheries Agreement. The purpose of that agreement was to establish in-stream flows to recover Yuba salmon and other culturally and commercially significant species. During the water rights hearing, FOR's lead scientist, Dr. Devin Pierce, presented expert testimony that showed a long-term decline of salmonids on the Yuba River. And it showed that salmon returns since the Yuba Accord have generally been even lower than the long-term trend. Dr. Pierce also testified about how the water transfer program enables a hydrograph shift on the Yuba River and how that imperils our native fishes system-wide, including the Yuba fish that have recently ended up at the Delta pumps in disproportionate numbers. No other parties offered evidence to the contrary. One of the most important conditions in the Yuba Accord was the promise of adaptive management of flows, which all parties agreed was essential. More than 17 years later, adaptive management has not occurred, and Yuba Water, in every forum, rigorously defends the flow schedule. Why? Because it has allowed the agency to generate revenue windfalls by selling off its environmental flows after they pass the compliance point. This is enabled by the water transfer program. As you've heard others state today, Yuba Water made over $51 million in 1 year recently when TUCOs for Delta operations were in effect. You also heard that those funds are being used for positive projects in Yuba County, but we believe that concentrated benefits to a small geographic area, just Yuba County, at the expense of the public trust, is not really the best policy. As a matter of principle, we don't believe exports should be allowed when water quality standards in the Delta are not being met. In the water rights proceeding, as you heard earlier, we asked the board to remove the loophole that allows Yuba Water to sell water during TUCOs when other exports are limited, or to require mitigation for the harmful effects of those transfers. As written, the order doesn't really clarify the board's intent to require Yuba to receive its own TUCO. And it also failed to recognize the importance of creating drought-minded policy for a 25-year permit. Ad hoc policymaking during drought emergencies has been messy for the board and the public. A programmatic approach is truly needed. So today, we ask that the board just refer the order back to staff to address some of the issues regarding transfers when TUCOs for Delta operations are in effect. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you as well, Ms. Mertz. Appreciate those comments. Last, I'd like to call up Megan Murphy.
Good morning, members of the board, staff, and AHO. Thank you for letting me speak this morning. I'm Megan Murphy, Senior Regulatory Advocate with the California Municipal Utilities Association. Together, the CMUA represents water and energy utilities across the state, supplying 75% of water to Californians and 25% of the energy to Californians. I'm here on behalf of CMUA to express our support for the State Water Board's adoption of the proposed order approving Yuba Water Agency's petition for a long-term transfer of water. We believe that the Yuba Accord is widely recognized as a model statement agreement and provides meaningful benefits for fish and wildlife and supports water supply reliability for the whole state. The adoption of the proposed order today will ensure that the important benefits of the Yuba Accord will continue to be realized for the next 25 years. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Appreciate those comments. Thank you again to everyone that's been part of this proceeding and for those that provided comments here today. Obviously, hearing continued concern insofar as how the order treats the transfers in the context of TUCPs, and to the comments that were made about things that more members have all said, rather here at the dais or in public. We are looking to make sure that we are being more thoughtful through drought, that we become more programmatic to the extent that we can, knowing that each drought has been its own unique sort of set of circumstances, but all fundamental meaning being that there are times when there simply isn't enough in the system, and we have to think carefully and thoughtfully of how we manage that system through those times. I think it's really a fundamental issue here about the appropriateness of trying to pivot to that programmatic approach here within the order, or where and when the board is, as we know, just a matter of time when it comes to drought here within the state. I'm just looking to maybe hear from other board members. I know that for myself, I don't think I've heard anything here at this point that changes what I know has been a lot of deliberation here in closed session and otherwise thoughts on the order. So I think I'm still comfortable with the order as written now, but certainly want to make sure we hear here at the dais from various board members. If there's anyone like to make comment or question.
Yeah,
Firestone.
sorry, thanks. I actually got new information from the testimony today that really makes me feel uncomfortable with where things are at without further discussion. I feel like we have had some good discussion in closed session, but I don't think that it fully understood or addressed the issues as described today. So I would really not feel comfortable approving this until there's ability to have further discussion. I saw that there's a closed session noticed for this, so if we need to do that, I'm open to that. I'm also open to, I always think it would be preferable to have open discussion on these things rather than have to go to closed session. So I can also, would love to unpack some of that as well, but open, love to hear from other board members
Thank you for those perspectives and that flag. Board member looking to hear from others. Board member McGuire.
Yeah, I really appreciated the public comments today, and I was with the exception of the whole discussion about temporary urgency change orders, I have been comfortable with the order as proposed. That's an area where it's a complicated process, and some of the comments that I heard about programmatic, mostly from Mr. Schutz, about the past practice of programmatic approvals of transfers in other temporary urgency change orders calls to question some of the discussion in this order for me, that I need to understand a little bit better how those pieces fit together. I think we're clear about our expectation for the Yuba transfer, and what certainly my intent is that those parties would come back if there were a proposal for a transfer under a TUCP condition for the projects. If they wish to transfer, they would have to submit a separate request for that. However, I'm wanting to make sure that the discussion in the order and also our past practices with approval of project-related temporary urgency change petitions is consistent there. I think the intent is correct, but the consistency is, I'm wondering if we have that right. So I would appreciate some further discussion.
Yeah, appreciate that, board member. Looking to Vice Chair or Board Member Morgan on any thoughts right now.
Well, I'm comfortable with going forward. We've spent time on this and did talk about TUCPs, but I'm comfortable having a further discussion as well. I don't see anything that would cause me to pause at this point. Just having been through several droughts, I do, Mr. Schutz, I always appreciate your perspective, but we don't just spend 10 minutes on these issues. When they come before us, staff spends an intense amount of time going through TUCPs. It goes through our executive team. We review what staff has prepared. There's always, lengthy reasoning that goes behind it. But of course, we can always improve on our process. I just don't think that this is the venue for it. But, open to have further discussions.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I don't know if there's anything to add, Board Member Morgan.
I don't have anything to add. I'm also comfortable with moving forward with understanding of, just the Vice Chair summarized it, just the TUC process. And I do appreciate, all the comments, and I've been following along within the order as the commenters and Mr. Schutz have been discussing and following along and just making sure that I'm understanding what the comments are and what the concerns are. And today I'm comfortable with moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Esquivel,
Yeah,
what
Mr.
may be
Lauper.
helpful is, you have heard from the public. Ms. Kinsey and Mr. Boland Bryan may have some comments that they'd like to make based on what they heard. And in doing that, it may be helpful, Ms. Firestone, to identify the specific concerns that you heard raised that you might like to hear the AHO weigh in on.
Yeah, very much. Did you want to clarify those?
Yeah,
Member Firestone?
sorry. So I think Board Member McGuire really summarized well the same issues. I think, that specifically what I heard and what I'd like to unpack is I won't re-summarize the comments that Board Member McGuire said, but I think the only thing maybe to build on that is, we declined to incorporate drought planning and addressing this need in our current Bay Delta plan proposal. We have a separate process around that, but that's not something that we're planning on doing in this update. We certainly could do that in the future. But I think that I'd really like us to discuss how we are thinking about drought planning. And I think it's fine to say this isn't the forum, but we don't have a forum actively being developed to consider that. And I think it is, as everyone has said, forefront of this board's mind. And I'd like us to be able to talk a little bit more about how we might be thinking about approaching that. In general, I think that I'll clarify one of the things that I didn't think that I didn't understand as well before it was clarified here today was that the discussion isn't to eliminate TUCPs or change that process. That is a legislative process. But what I understood today was that the idea was to say there should be some forward planning around drought within this program and transfers so that if there is a need for TUCPs or for TUCOs, that there's forward-looking plan for how to either mitigate that or recover, ensure recovery after that. And I think that is consistent, as I think about our water rights orders, is consistent with many things we've done in our water rights orders, or is just thinking about how we identify planning needs. And front of mind for all of us is drought and prolonged drought. So I think it's actually very consistent. And to me, the issue is different than what I understood. That issue is different than what I understood the argument to be from the NGOs. I don't think, what I heard from the NGOs today is that we all agree there's a TUCP process. They don't like it. They feel like we've used it a lot more than ideally we would. But given that, we should be looking at how to ensure what we're approving incorporates drought planning, and thinking about how to incorporate that into the permit. And I think that's different than what was at least discussed, what my understanding of what was discussed in closed session. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I appreciate that, board member. And maybe on that, we can hear from Presiding Officer Kinsey and Mr. Sample and Bryant to help us.
I will do my best. I will try to, I will certainly hope to contribute to the conversation, and we can follow up Ms. Firestone, with your questions. A couple of thoughts here based on the comments that I heard from you and from the commenters today. One, with respect to the concern about a more programmatic process and encouraging, incentivizing planning for drought purposes, which I understand would involve possible reoperation of reservoirs and reservoir management in anticipation of droughts, to be prepared for those such that temporary urgency change orders would not be either as needed or as common. One distinction, I think, here with respect to this particular transfer that's before you that are important, maybe it's more than one. These are flows involved in this transfer, flows that are released for in-stream purposes primarily. So they are flows that are going to be in the system to some extent regardless, and then the approval of the transfer is the authorization for those flows to then be so-called picked up in the system by a purchaser through an agreement with Yuba Water. Otherwise, that water would still be in the system and would be available for others to essentially pick up. So to some extent, this would not authorizing the transfer in certain conditions, whether it's during a temporary urgency change order or in subsequent years. I don't know that very minimal difference, as I understand, in the actual flows that you would see in the system. It would essentially be a penalty, as I understand. Penalty may be the wrong word, but it would mean that Yuba County would not get the benefit of those releases, but it would not actually change the operations, as I understand it. There are releases for in-stream flows, and then I should also add, to be fair, there are also releases, as I understand, to meet the end-of-year storage targets in the reservoir as well. So the two types of releases, but both would occur regardless of whether the transfers are actually approved. On the point of the TUCPs and the more global approvals that have occurred, this order does attempt to require or make more clear that Yuba County would be required to come in for its own urgency transfer order and urgency transfer petition. Those change orders, when you're granting a TUCO, those are specific to the water right. It's a petition to change the terms of a water right, the permit terms or the license terms for a limited period of time. So they are project specific. Now, my understanding of what has occurred in the past, at least with respect to this prior transfer, is that the prior transfer as a condition of approval required compliance with D1641. And D1641 is, of course, tied to the SWP and CVP water rights. And so when you had a temporary urgency change order that modified the terms of those water rights, it created this, I would say, lack of clarity about what applies. But through 1641, arguably, those changes were then incorporated into these transfers that were hinged upon D1641. And I believe, as I understand the prior board's orders in approving those TUCOs, explicitly included transfers that were contingent on D1641 requirements. That is not the case in this order, and that's an attempt to clarify. This approval of the transfer conditions the transfer on satisfaction of water quality objectives directly. It does not refer to D1641, and it's an attempt to plug that gap. So there were changes made in the way this order is approved to address that issue. And then to somewhat state the obvious, this proceeding is, of course, a tip of the iceberg in terms of exports and what occurs in those urgency change order contexts. So it is a small piece. However, I will note that the order does have an extensive reservation of authority. So if the board were to go forward in a future time with a programmatic approach, and there are many different mechanisms that could take, this approval could then be reopened and modified. And you do have an AHO now who can actually conduct these proceedings and do that work for you to fit with whatever programmatic approach might be considered by the board. So I will stop there. There's probably more that could be said, but I want to make sure that I'm addressing the questions that are actually on the table.
Really appreciate that, Ms. Kenzie, and looking to Board Member Firestone and Board Member McGuire as to what additional comfort or not that's provided you.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So kind of the two issues, I just want to unpack the more. So to overly simplify probably the TUCP, the idea is this is different than past practices. And this would be additional process and layer of a TUCP consideration necessary for this, for a TUCO on this water right, which we haven't typically done. So this is a change. And this wouldn't necessarily change things for other water rights because they refer to D1641, whereas this one refers to the Bay Delta Plan. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. I wanted to look to the
Yeah.
attorneys for the board and confirming that to be fair.
Yeah,
but that is
I would also love if there, I know, I don't want to totally open up everything, but it would be helpful to hear from the parties as well, just make, since this is
Yeah,
super helpful.
Yeah, one moment. Let me first hear from Mr. Lawford. Thank you, board member.
Sure. And if Ms. Alley wants to augment, but as I had read the order that was prepared by the AHO and circulated, and then, hearing the discussion today, it is fundamentally different than what we saw Mr. Schutz describe in the sense that last go around, project operations were the subject of the TUCPs and the TUCOs that this board ultimately adopted, and that was hinged off what was incorporated into D1641, and that's what they came to request relief from. As the AHO has written this order, the way that I'm viewing the language and was reviewing it again after hearing Mr. Schutz's comments is in order for this transfer to go forward, there needs to be compliance with the updated water quality objectives in the Bay Delta Plan. That was a point of contention that the Delta parties disagreed with, but the view of our office, the view of the AHO, is that those objectives are in effect and they can and be the basis of an appropriate condition on these transfers. And so if there was to be a relaxation through a TUCO of State Water Project and CVP operations to modify what is currently, their D1641 requirements on their permits, that would not change the fact that the transfer authorized by the proposed order would need some additional relief because those water quality objectives would still be in effect and a condition on that transfer. That's as it's written by the AHO at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you. Vice Chair.
And just a question on that, because I'm going through the order, I'm looking at footnote 9, but then are there other areas that we could reference, just in looking at the exact language here? I mean, it seems pretty clear to me in footnote 9, but it's the footnote 9 referencing,
18,
page 17.
Oh, is it 17?
What was it?
18.
18.
And on the issue of the TUCPs and the TUCOs and this issue of hinging off of D1641 versus hinging off of the water quality objectives, footnote 8 on page 17, although I think Mr. Schutz's comment, it may not be the model of clarity, but maybe with this discussion, the intent there, as I understand that footnote and as I read it, is to clarify that this distinction with this approval of the transfer, which is hinged directly off of water quality objectives, that Yuba Water would more clearly be required to come in and request a specific temporary urgency change order with respect to this permit and applicable to this transfer.
Yeah, and that is the change here that is different than previous approaches and brings them in the door, doesn't spell out exactly. And I hear, the NGO party's desire to say, well, blanket no transfers when there is a TUCO, a temporary urgency change order in place. But that's very broad. And there are other transfers, meaning that those transfers would go on and this one wouldn't. And again, is the concern of a piecemeal approach here on what is, yes, a challenge and something the board is trying its best to grapple with. But at least here, the change is that, and if we need to make it a bit more clear, maybe that's something we can do, and that's within our sort of minor edits authority here without having to go back. But is that they are expected to come in with their own TUCP and have a TUCO when as it's concerned to their their transfer. And I think that's the appropriate moment for the board to opine, condition, and otherwise create some balance or further balancing on that moment. But I believe it's hard to do that here in an anticipatory fashion because we don't have, and the order is clear. You can't transfer unless you're meeting all water quality obligations, the projects that is, T1641 is being met, BIOPS are being met. So all those environmental protections need to be in place before transfers happen. And it's really what we're talking about here is around moments when we have temporary urgency change petitions that have been brought to the board. We have produced an order during drought conditions, and it's usually the major projects at that point that are doing that. But this at least gets them in the door as well. And there are all other sorts of transfers, I'm sure, that are occurring that we likewise need to get a better hold on in these moments of drought conditions. That's the way I've been kind of seeing it. But again, if, yeah, Board Member McGuire, maybe.
Yeah.
And I do see you, Mr. Becerra. I don't mean to ignore, I'm just trying to.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure we hear from you here in a moment, but maybe if we can hear from Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, I do want to hear from Mr. Becerra too, but I appreciate the summary, Chair Esquivel. I think that's right. And I went back as this discussion was happening here. I went and I looked at the language, and in particular, condition 10, which is on page 34, which I think reads very clearly. And that's what gave me comfort with this order about exactly what you said, so I won't repeat all that. So I think the intent was there. I was thrown a little bit off if there was some sort of other larger, more programmatic approval that the board might consider that would encapsulate this transfer as well. It sounds like that's not the case, but I concur with Mr. Schutz that there may be areas in the order, perhaps in the footnote language or a couple of other places where some additional clarity might be worthwhile to think about. So I have an open mind about some wordsmithing there, but otherwise still comfortable with the order. This has been very helpful.
This has been a very good discussion, and again, I just want to make sure we're doing our best to create the system that we're definitely needing to better have, but appropriately at the various moments. And I think it's definitely a balance here on how best to make sure we're improving what are really difficult conditions, and certainly we've seen those here these last decade, has been noted. But not doing more than we can necessarily within this space.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that, I completely concur with Board Member Firestone in terms of the need to better plan for these conditions, because I think Mr. Schutz is right. Maybe not 10 minutes, maybe it'd be a little bit more time than that to review.
Yeah, but
it's going to be under a very duress. It's going to be because it's an urgent situation. The parties would be proposing to transfer water to other parties that need it. And that would be the rationale, I would imagine. Whatever that future board would have to make a decision quickly, probably with incomplete information. And so the more we can do to be prepared for those different kinds of circumstances, either through the Bay Delta Plan process or through another deliberate process, I think we need to do that and really be thoughtful about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comments Board Member Firestone made about the Bay Delta Plan and whether it is that place where we're doing our best to try to manage this. Obviously, we can't have an extensive conversation on the Bay Delta Plan up here, but what I think does continue to flag is that as we move into implementation of that, where we get past it, I think we'll find ourselves with a far more active discussion here as to how the system is playing out, and especially in drier times. And I think it's here appropriately constructing that better, more thoughtful approach in the long term around drought here at the board. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I think this is a good discussion, and I agree with all points that have been made. But again, just to reiterate, I just don't think this is the process for it. I know we have a drought planning team that at times is more active than other, and we know what those times are. And I agree, it does get rushed. We usually get those TUCP requests on the heels of an executive order, and part of that executive order or a separate executive order is direction to move water where, as you say, Board Member McGuire, where it's needed the most. And so there's just a lot of factors that, a lot of moving parts during that time frame. But I think if we're going to be more serious, which I believe we all intend to be more serious about triennial reviews in the Bay Delta Plan. So, that might be an appropriate place to nest it, or maybe, initially here through the drought planning team that, a lot of folks have probably been reassigned, but there's a lot of expertise in that group that's been working on the orders in the past, and seeing where it would fit in strategic plan, that we as a board determine, where we should place our priorities. And so I think there's a lot of different places that this could go, but I'm hearing across the board, commitment for further discussion. Absolutely.
Is there places that, well, Board Member Firestone, did you want to?
Yeah.
And thank you for this discussion. This is really helpful for us to be able to work through here collectively as a board, and for folks with us as we do. But
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a few things that I don't feel like are being characterized quite how I understand them, but I think overall, I don't know that they're that important to go into. So I think at the core, what I'm trying to pinpoint is there's different, I think what I'm hearing is, and I would totally agree with, is that, TUCPs are a tool that we have. They don't, they are emergency and immediate and don't lend themselves to thinking about how to prevent things or have the time and space to look at how to mitigate. And and we've seen this play out over and over and over again at this point. I think we should be looking at how we can incorporate a more proactive planning process for entities where there's, frankly, a high likelihood of having to come in for TUCPs. And I think we've seen that is something that has unfortunately continued to happen and isn't how we should be managing water. I think there's a really good point, and I'm trying to process, is this the right place? Is, Bay Delta, whether it's maybe, obviously we're not really we've kind of, there was specific comments about not considering that at this time in that process. And so looking to, as the vice chair said, future maybe periodic reviews or prioritization of new processes there. But I think the question is, to me, is where is the right place to be looking at that drought planning on different scales? So I think for the specific impacts on this water right, big water rights and transfers, it does make sense for the water right to be looking at drought planning. But if it's about Bay Delta outflow, basically at that systemic level, which it sounds like maybe it is, given Ms. Kenzie's comments, and I want to unpack that a little bit about, would this just be picked up by other water rights users or not? But I do think if it's about planning and conditioning things for systemic outflow of Bay Delta, then I don't think that it makes sense to do that planning with a specific license. Permit, not license. Approval order. Sorry, I'm using the right. So what I would like to just unpack a little bit better is if, what are the potential, if this order were to say, develop a drought plan, basically, for how to prevent the need for TUCPs or mitigate and ensure recovery for extended droughts, as an example. That what I heard you say, Ms. Kinsey, is that the problem is that they don't necessarily have that the impacts of that is really at the outflow in terms of, or within the Bay Delta diversions and exports, and less about in-stream flow, well, specifically on the Yuba. So I think if I can, because it would get picked up it would get picked up by other water users. So I'd like, and I think now I'm confusing everybody, but if I'd like to be able to unpack that issue of what could be done in terms of that long-term drought planning for this particular water right, or, and how does that fit with, because I agree, I think a more comprehensive drought planning for Bay Delta outflow at the systemic level doesn't fit here. But I think for this particular water right and for water rights in general, building that process in makes sense. So I'm trying to just understand which situation we're in. And I can try and clarify because I think I've just confused everyone.
If I can, board member, I think the challenge is, your desire to have a drought plan that, avoids or minimizes or mitigates the needs for temporary urgency change petitions are really about the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, right? And their requests for those reliefs. It would be hard, I think, for Yuba to come up with something that is minimizing the requests for those because, them coming in for theirs would be teed off of that larger request that is, again, stemming from the actual projects and their operations. And so, again, the root is in that more systemic space, a direction for them to develop a plan that avoids their need for a TUCP or a TUCO is actually a little counter to this change that we're making to bring them in to have one so as to have a basis for some conditioning of those transfers, I think. And so, it's, I hear you writ large, what you're looking for on the system. Like, how do we avoid TUCPs? How do we not need them and instead plan for those low flow times and implement that as opposed to just a relaxation of, the environmental standards outright or whatever is requested in the TUCP and that we adopt in the TUCO. So I don't know if that helps, but again, your desire for the a minimizing or to not need TUCOs or for TUCPs to be filed to us is misplaced necessarily at direction for Yuba to develop a plan to do that, which is all we really have unless we were to direct other folks that weren't part of this. Right.
I think that's that's what I'd like to get clarity on. And I would love to just hear maybe, the NGOs and the parties speak a little bit to that, because I don't know that I feel like there aren't, I agree that this is not the place to condition or plan for project operations. Like, absolutely agree with that. But I would love to hear from NGOs in particular, and certainly if the applicant has a perspective on this. But I feel like the question I have is there a particular plan impact that is appropriate that isn't just the broader projects, but is appropriate for this particular water right.
See Mr. Whittlesey coming up. I wanted to look at the HO just really quick to see if there was anything that they wanted to offer, but then we can certainly hear from Mr. Whittlesey and Mr. Becerra.
I was actually going to make the suggestion that we hear from Yuba County Water Agency on this issue, who understand their own operations better than I will admit.
Thank you, Ms. Kenzie. Mr. Whittlesey.
Yeah, I just want to help have this broad topic kind of unpacked like you asked for, Board Member Firestone. So generally, in times of drought, Yuba Water Agency does not create the need for water in the state. There's a statewide need for water. Yuba Water Agency is a supplier of water in this, based on what Ms. Kinsey mentioned, is primarily the in-stream flows that we're providing in the lower Yuba River. So I think it is a misplaced discussion here based on this transfer and this action in front of you today. We're happy to participate in whatever process comes out on how we're going to manage, we collectively, water users and the board, for a TUCP, TUCO program going forward. What I want to make sure is we completely understand. I know we've been talking about the language in, I think it was footnote 9 and a couple other section 17 is not clear. Yuba Water Agency understands that we are no longer going to be allowed to use DWR's TUCP or TUCO process. That's very clear. My board is well aware of that. If we need to make minor modifications to the language, I propose we do it right now and just, it's very clear that we have to do it. We have to come with our individual TUCP that will result in a TUCO. We get that. So let's make that clear. What I also want to address is when we are in this space, we're in these serious drought years, and there are TUCO and TUCP discussions going on that we aren't, and Ms. Kinsey mentioned the word penalty. We want to make sure that the water we are providing is credited to Yuba Water Agency. That's we don't want to be penalized for that and kind of left out of those discussions. So again, we don't create the drought. There's a statewide need for water in these times. That's why you hear executive orders. That's why you'll hear make water available, move water around. We're here to do that. That's what this programmatic transfer does. We're happy to participate in drought planning, but this transfer, this action in front of you today is not the place for that. We're willing to do it. We want to participate in that and solve the problems, but we should be clear on the TUCO, TUCP requirements today in this action, and then move forward. Thank you. Ryan may have some comments as well.
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Becerra come up and speak now as well. Thank you, Mr. Whittlesey, for that and cutting through. Mr. Becerra.
Yes, thank you very much. Just once again, to agree with my client, we fully and completely understand that footnote 9 may require Yuba to file its own TUCP in a future drought situation if Bay Delta water quality standards can't be met. I mean, that's what it says. That's what would happen. And frankly, that's a little bit of a pill to swallow for Yuba because, you can imagine Yuba is the tail on the dog in that situation. And in, I believe it's page 12 of the order, it discusses the copious amounts of evidence we took in this hearing concerning compliance with what is probably the most difficult Bay Delta water quality standard to be met, which is the electrical conductivity standard at Old River, which is way down in the South Delta. And we took, probably a full day worth of evidence on that. And the order correctly finds Yuba does not have the ability to affect compliance at that standard, at that place. But nonetheless, we understand the concerns about TUCPs, and we understand we will need to come in with one of our own. And Board Member Vice Chair Diadamo made the exact correct point, which is that in order for you to depart from Bay Delta water quality standards, as I understand the law currently, the governor needs to issue an emergency order under the Emergency Services Act waiving Water Code Section 13247 so that you can do that. There's a process to that. We will have to pay very close attention in those circumstances if we want to continue to transfer water in those circumstances. And then as to the point as to how the accord works, Ms. Kinsey made exactly the right point, which is that this petition does not propose, and no party has proposed because it's not within the scope of the proceeding, to modify the Yuba River Accord's in-stream flow standards. So mechanically, Yuba operates its reservoir according to those standards, which include stream flows for every water year type, including critically dry years. It was, back in 2008, this board approved that. It's a very integrated, comprehensive system for managing the Yuba, which accounts for drought conditions. There are, if we want to get deep into the weeds, the accord includes, I believe it's a 30,000 acre foot additional contribution of stream flows as a result of the Yuba County member units agreeing to do conjunctive use in extremely dry years in order to put more water in the river. So the accord includes all that, and then the flows come out at the Marysville gauge. Yuba produces them at the Marysville gauge according to the minimum stream flow standards, and it is accounting downstream of the Marysville gauge into the delta that determines whether or not Yuba actually transfers that water or whether it goes somewhere else. And on that point of it potentially going somewhere else, if Yuba is not authorized to transfer it, it actually impairs delta water quality because a Yuba transfer has a carriage water requirement associated with it to leave some of the water in the delta. If it's not Yuba transfer water, it's diverted by whoever is able to put their hands on it, which primarily is probably the CVP and SWP, with no compensation to Yuba, but it could be anybody in the delta. It's just there in the delta at that point with no carriage water requirements whatsoever. So it may be a little counterintuitive to some, but a Yuba transfer actually improves delta water quality by applying a carriage water standard in the delta to leave some of that water in stream. So it's a very complex system, and I certainly understand the board's dilemma with TUCPs. You're being asked to make extraordinarily important decisions on the fly. It's a tough spot to be in for everybody. But in this case, that's a system-wide issue that is not really anything associated with the Yuba transfers, again, which are the tail on the dog of this, and we understand our life might get a little different in those circumstances. We may have to be trooping in here very quickly too. We'll do it. That's what's necessary to make this transfer work under these circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. And again, Mr. Whittlesey, appreciate those points. I guess at this point, Ms. Kenzie, wondering if there is language you all have considered that kind of beefs up what I think it might be still some ambiguity. And I'm seeing Mr. Schutz walk up, so I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear from him. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Schutz.
So we've heard a lot of things, and I don't want to add more topics. One additional comment to what Ms. Kenzie said and was sort of hinted at by Mr. Becerra. A third way that transfers occur in this system is through groundwater substitution. And it's not just the 30,000 acre feet that Mr. Becerra referred to. Broadly speaking, no one's argued that Yuba is the controller of delta water quality and so forth. What we've said in hearing was that when temporary urgency change orders are in effect, Yuba is a beneficiary of those because it gets increased revenues because water is scarce. And the $51 million a year, which went in part to Yuba Water Agency, in part to those groundwater substitution entities, is a large amount of money in 1 year at a time when other folks were begging for water. So the idea here was to address, to share the benefit, not to punish YCWA. In terms of a language or an order, what we pointed out in hearing was that it has been the past practice of this board to interpret operative water quality standards to mean those that were in effect under a TUCO when a TUCO was in effect, not what was written in D1641 or the operative water quality control plan. So something added to condition 10, such as, for the purpose of this condition, achievement of numeric water quality objective means those objectives written in the operative water quality control plan, not as they may have been modified by any operative temporary urgency change order. That doesn't fully give the NGOs what we're looking for. The process requirement for Yuba Water Agency to get its own temporary urgency change order is better than just getting to ride on DWR and reclamation. But it's another process step that it's very hard to see how it's going to not be granted, given the past practice of the board, honestly. And I didn't mean to disrespect the board and its process, Ms. Diadamo. What we had asked for was some kind of, preset mitigation, and based on the benefits, that depends on what the benefits actually are that Yuba Water Agency gets. Now, you may not go that direction, but we think that is more of a programmatic approach, and it eliminates the need for another process for Yuba to come before you, for us to have to all show up here and say what we have to say about it. And theoretically, if others are going to be held to the same standard, then they too, as transferors, would have to come here, and you'll have a whole bunch of other TUCPs pending before you. That might not be the best process. Anyway, those are some suggestions that I have. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you for that feedback, Mr. Schutz. Appreciate that.
I didn't, Mr. Schutz, sorry. The proposal, that very last point, your proposal is what exactly? I didn't fully catch it.
I think what he was suggesting or proposing is to have mitigation already kind of baked in up front for any of those future temporary urgency change orders that they may come in with. I think the challenge is not sure what that would be.
Well,
and whether
I'll
we should
give you an
hard bake that
example.
necessarily for all, future drought scenarios that we may find ourselves. I think that's the
And can you summarize what you're proposing? If is that what you're proposing?
We proposed a percentage of the revenues go to a fund. And we also suggested that in years after the temporary urgency change order and the emergency order were no longer in effect, that there be some mandated reductions in the benefits to YCWA. Those were the things that we proposed. The idea of a percentage, frankly, came from East Bay Mud. When they get additional water through their Freeport diversion in drought emergencies, they donate a portion of that to the McCallumney River. And that was the idea, in very broad brush, of a mitigation during extraordinary circumstances.
Okay, yeah, appreciate that. Vice Chair, please.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, but I have really strong feelings that this is not the place to do this. Yuba County, I can't say this with 100% of certainty, but it's a disadvantaged communities. And a lot of that money goes back into the river. It goes into restoration projects. This is an example of what we want to see more of, more money going in to the river, and also flood control. They have huge flood control challenges in the community. And so I just think without going through the evidentiary record, just the amount of time I've spent in the area, you see the benefits that this is providing to the community. And I just think that it's a dangerous precedent to be going down this path because they made $51 million during a drought, and some sense of sharing the benefit. To me, it would be punitive if we were to do something like this. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't want to have this kind of discussion, but again, I think it should be in a broader context. I also think, I just hadn't thought about the carriage loss, but that was a very good point. I don't, there may be some counter to that, but transfers carry with them, no pun intended, carriage loss requirements. And so to the extent that some of that water is actually staying in and not being picked up, I don't know that that's the case. But, there does seem to be that additional benefit. And it feels, and I know that's not what's on the table right now or being proposed, but to further restrict to the point that we disincentivize transfers, I think that overall this program isn't just a benefit to Yuba County Water Agency, but to other water users, and providing some certainty. We're trying to go through, the water rights modernization, the Cal Water system, for us to be able to really more precisely order curtailments. This is the kind of thing that helps, because hopefully we're going to be in that situation where we can more accurately cut people off. And so I just feel like excess water floating around, and the initial purpose was, the initial flow release was intended to benefit fish. And then, just having it floating around in the system where others can pick it up, I think in this case, it actually achieves multiple policy objectives.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Appreciate those points. I do see you at the mic again, Mr. Becerra. I do want to actually just go to the AHO again to see if there is language that is kind of bolstering what is, again, generally this, and I know for some may not be going far enough, but getting them in the door when there is a TUCP or the TUCO in the system to have their own, so that there is this consideration of any balancing that the board could potentially do at that moment for this transfer.
I have two, thank you, Chairman Esquivel. I have two thoughts. First, I wanted to point out to the discussion that we're having right now, footnote 10 on page 19, which is directly relevant to mitigation, which was, this proposal from the NGOs was certainly considered by the AHO quite carefully. There are some requirements in terms of approving such a proposal that would require relating the mitigation to be connected in some way to the impacts of the project and having sufficient evidence to do that. But I wanted to make sure you saw footnote 10 there on that page. With respect to, and I'll pause a moment, I'm next going to turn to footnote 8 on page 17 on this issue of the TUCOs.
And I'll just clarify that I'm not after this discussion, I feel like the drought planning needs to be, I agree with the idea that this needs to be a more comprehensive process. And I don't think it makes sense to include that here. So just to clarify, that's not what I'm, the direction I would go. I think in general, it sounds like the chair and the AHO may have some language. I think that we can't tweak the language at this point without sending it back. But I'll just say in general, after fleshing this out, I feel a lot more comfortable with where we're landing. So I remain uncomfortable with not having a plan for how we're doing drought planning, and TUCPs, but I agree with the discussion that this isn't, that it doesn't make sense to incorporate a piece here at this time in this particular proceeding.
Thank you, board member. And just thank you. This has been a very helpful discussion for us to be able to really unpack, make sure we have comfort, and for the record and for all folks to know, this is important to the board. So I do appreciate you elevating and us having this. And Mr. Lawford.
Well, I was just going to clarify in response to Member Firestone's question about what the board can and cannot do. And Water Code Section 1411 does allow minor technical, to make technical or other minor changes to in the proposed order and adopt it as the board's order. And when you're doing that, it's limited to clarifying changes or changes of a similar nature that does not materially change the factual or legal basis. And Ms. Kinsey and I, I'm not sure if you're going to offer what we discussed, but the change that we're going to look at that the board could consider and incorporate into a motion would fall within that language of 1411.
Great.
And I will turn to that now
Yeah, thank
with that. So we're looking at footnote 8, line 3. The proposal here is to strike the phrase, "the water quality objectives of," and insert DWR's compliance with. So the operative part would read, our approval of the petition is conditioned on compliance with the objectives of the operative Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan at the time transfers occur, rather than DWR's compliance with D1641. And the intent there is to clarify that Yuba Water's obligation to apply for a TUCO is no longer hinged on DWR's compliance with the standards that apply to DWR, that Yuba Water is held to the water quality objectives. And I think you heard the clarifying understanding here from Yuba Water on that point. But I do think that this minor change clarifies the intent of the footnote.
Thank you for that, Mr. Becerra.
Could I respectfully ask Ms. Kinsey just to repeat it one more time so I fully capture that?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's probably true of all. If you didn't capture it, then others probably have the same position. So we're looking at footnote 8, line 3 of the footnote, striking the water quality objectives of, and inserting in its place DWR's compliance with.
So the full sentence would read, "We note, however, that because our approval of the petition is conditioned on compliance with the objectives of the operative Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan at the time transfers occur, rather than DWR's compliance with D1641."
Correct.
And then the rest of the sentence reads as it currently does.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that adjustment. As Mr. Schutz noted, maybe not. We do our best to be clear in our wording here, but hopefully that does help bolster what the board's position here is and our expectation and desire of ensuring that the project comes in, or the permittees here come in on under their own temporary urgency change petition and a potential order that provides, again, the board an opportunity to, if appropriate, further condition or modify or consider how the transfer is operating in a TUCP condition or a TUCO order.
Correct. Yes. And I think the phrasing that we heard earlier today was that the Yuba Water could not, quote, ride on DWR's approval of the approval received by DWR of a TUCP.
Thank you. I really appreciate, again, the discourse we've had. For me, that further bolsters my support, and otherwise look to fellow board colleagues. So if there's additional discussion worth having, clarity, or a motion.
I'll make a motion. So I move adoption of the order with the little help here, a change sheet, and the clarification read into the record by Ms. Kinsey as to footnote 8.
And the additional clarifications that she had read into the record,
Yes.
that were mostly Scrivener's errors to be corrected in the final order. And that was part of her opening presentation.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call the roll call vote?
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Board Member Morgan,
Aye.
and Chair Escobar. Thank you.
Aye. Thank you as well. And the vote is unanimous and the order is adopted. Again, just a lot of appreciation to everyone. Thank you for the time here at the dais as well to really unpack and have this discourse and discussion and expectation setting from the board. So thank you, everyone. And much appreciation. That wraps item number 6. That now brings us toward the end of our board meeting here. We have now board member reports, and looking to fellow board colleagues, I have not had a chance to glance at my calendar. If there are any reports. Yeah, Board Member Morgan.
Turn on my mic. So thank you. I had the privilege of attending a groundbreaking ceremony in the community of Allensworth yesterday. Allensworth is the first and only California town founded by African Americans. They have been struggling Since they were founded over 100 years ago, I think it was like 118 years ago, with safe water. And they have natural occurring arsenic. The last couple of decades, they have been working with us on various items, aging infrastructure, also the just infrastructure that is not able to treat the arsenic. They had the groundbreaking for a new well, and we contributed 3.8 million to that. They were very enthusiastic and grateful, expressed great appreciation to the state board. They were funny. They said, right after this ceremony, we're actually going to start drilling. And so it truly was a groundbreaking. And so it was not symbolic. They just really are looking forward to this project. They have a tank for storage that's coming later. This town really has gone through just a lot to survive. And so they really are pushing forward to make sure that they have safe drinking water at their taps and that they can continue as the only African-American family run town in the state. So it really was a privilege to be there and to celebrate with them. Just want to pass on their deep appreciation for the state board's involvement in getting them to this historic moment.
Thank you, board member, not just for being there, but for being such an incredible leader in that space. I know that you and we had the pleasure of touring earlier this summer, and there were a number of, water failures that were happening, intermittent availability. And it's been great to be able to just partner with the community and be able to support them. And just thank you for your leadership across that all. It's really exciting to see that project come to fruition. So thank you. Nothing from the vice chair, nothing from myself either. Nothing from any other board members. Well, great. Easy board member reports. So we will have our next board meeting on February 3rd. We will be going to closed session on sites. We will be in 2550, which still has windows. So that will be good. Let's go ahead and take a lunch. Do we want to give ourselves a full hour? Or do you want to just do a 45-minute and just get to 45 is okay with folks? Okay, well then let's go ahead and say we'll reconvene in closed session at 1:20. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to think through. Again, our next board meeting will be on February 3rd then. And so until then, everyone be safe, be well. We'll see you here on the 3rd. Thanks everyone for just a really productive board meeting. Much appreciation. See you all soon.